Kongversation.
Apparently, the strain of corona only affects those in hell and leads to a virus called COVID-666. More like coronavirus, am I right? A little Spanish language humor for you all in these trying times.
Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Cameron Reigle.
And hey, so we're finally doing this episode. We're going to be discussing the Sea of Thieves novel, Athena's Fortune, a good solid 17 months or so after it was released. This was an episode we've had on the docket for that long, actually, and things just kept pushing it back. Kind of like the Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle Donkey Kong Adventure episode. It just like, yeah, we're gonna get to it, but then after it's like the new hot thing to discuss, then other stuff happens, current events get in the way, and, you know, we don't get around to it, and then it's just kind of like, well, we'll get to it when we have an opportunity, and this was going to be the episode before our fake E3, our kind of pathetic quarantine zone E3 pantomime from home. But we're still going to be doing some stuff the week of E3, June 9th through June 11th. We will be streaming like all day long. We'll be streaming games. We'll be having conversations. We'll still be doing that, but I have decided to scale back a lot of the stuff we were doing. We were going to have like a DK Vine Direct, and it's going to be funny. I was going to walk out on the white screen and game announcements. I'm going to pretend like I'm Reggie. Oh, now I'm Phil Spencer, and I'm taking off my shirt. It's going to do all that, you know. But honestly, right now, I don't think anybody's really in the mood for that much goofiness. It just doesn't feel appropriate. And, of course, I'm discussing all of the protests going on right now over police brutality. And, look, I'm not going to sit here I'm not going to stand up on my soapbox and lecture anybody for 10 minutes. Anybody who knows me knows where I stand. Of course, Black Lives Matter. You better fucking believe they do. And, you know, this is what's happening right now is a long overdue catharsis. It's a reckoning, and it needs to happen. So it's at the time that I planned everything, I was like, coronavirus, COVID-19, that's going to be like the big thing still, and the only thing we really have to worry about and think about. But with all of this going on now, I'm just like, yeah, let's not do that silly direct. Let's not do any of this.
It's something that I think we all sort of at the time thought about as a staff, that, well, we're not going to do our usual E3 fun event, and people are in a kind of malaise, stuck at home. We need to do something that people can just have fun with and kind of forget the state of the world. But at the moment, people kind of shouldn't be forgetting the state of the world.
Yeah, that is true. And like, we're still going to be doing some stuff. We're going to be having fun, but it's going to be a little bit more low key. And it should be. And honestly, like, you probably should, I don't know, if you haven't, like, donated, or if you haven't, given any of your time to the efforts right now, it's well worth it. And look, I'm not going to sit here and like parse through everything. And, you know, like, I've known some really good cops in my life, but the truth is police brutality across the nation is a real problem. And if you can't see that, then, you know, I just ask that, you know, as much as we gamers like to emulate and step into the shoes of the protagonist that we control, it's well worth everyone's time to do that occasionally to what black men and women across the nation have to go through every day. And, you know, it requires some empathy, and it requires like stepping outside of your perspective if you're white. So, just think about it. That's all I'm going to say. And I will add really quick that I am proud of this community. I am so proud that for the most part, like our little community, the DK Vine bubble, the fandom that is Donkey Kong and Rare and Platonic, for the most part, like everybody is pretty solid and like understands what's going on. And I really am proud of everyone in this community. And of course, I'm proud of the studios and creators for like stepping up and, making statements. It feels really good to be a fan of these people, and that these people who created these characters and these worlds that I love are solid individuals, and they're not complete shitbags, because, a lot of times people have to separate the creators from the art, but in our community, in our fandom, we don't have to do that. So that's pretty cool.
I would also say to that, like, there's a lot of discussion of like brands making public statements regarding Black Lives Matter and just in general everything going on, and people being easily able to point out, well, your company isn't practicing what you preach. Here's 15 examples proving it. Every person I've met from Rare and Platonic, I trust that they absolutely are 100% genuine in this message.
Right. And, this, like, I'm not here to be the woke police, because obviously, DK Vine, we've gone through an evolution as well. So it's like, I think it's not so much where you were back at a certain point, it's where you are now. And I'm definitely proud of everyone in my immediate sphere, and of course the aforementioned studios. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about that. Cameron, do you have anything more you'd like to add?
I guess I just want to say, do what you can. Speak out if you're in a place that's safe to do so, and you have the mental energy to speak out. Donate if
right.
you have the money to donate. If you're severely lacking in both those departments, just look for ways to help, educate yourself, and just have a heart.
Yeah, honestly, like, just small actions can go a long way. That I know that seems trite, and it probably is at this point in time, but I think it goes a long way towards the future, and like rectifying your own behavior, recognizing ingrained prejudices that you don't consciously want to have, but may be there. It's a process, and it's a lot of self-examination and a lot of putting up a magnifying glass to our culture. And it's hard work, and I know it's uncomfortable. And like nobody likes to do it, but I think it has to be done, and I think we owe it to our Black brothers and sisters to do it, because like this is long overdue. Come on,
Black Lives Matter and defund the police.
All right, moving on. Let's get into the topic at hand, and that is Sea of Thieves: Athena's Fortune, a literary analysis. So Cameron, I'm going to reveal my age here. I was born in 1983. And that was some 6 months after the movie Return of the Jedi came out. So as a result, I wasn't a Star Wars fan as a kid, because by the time I was old enough that would have been plausible that I would have gotten into it, there was no ancillary media to kind of hook me into the fictional universe. There were no cartoons on the air, like the droids and Ewok stuff went off the air by the time I was watching Saturday morning cartoons. So there's nothing that really served as a gateway like real Ghostbusters or the Ninja Turtle cartoons did for those respective properties. And being the only child in my family, I had no brothers or sisters to introduce Star Wars to me either, kind of hand down their knowledge of that fictional galaxy. So I remember when, like, at a certain age, seeing the movies on cable every now and again. And then I went to a friend's sleepover birthday party once where they put on Return of the Jedi for everyone. And I was just hopelessly lost. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know why these human characters were in space, if they were like astronauts that like got lost or something. I didn't know why they spent 40 minutes in a desert, if it was called Star Wars, where are the stars? It was just impenetrable nonsense to me. And because there was none of that ancillary media, it just felt like this weird, cold, dead, distant relic of a generation that came before me. So, yeah, I was just in the dead zone when it came to Star Wars. But then flash forward to 1997. And I got a Nintendo 64 early in that year. After saving and scamming all the money I could, once I learned that the Donkey Kong Country...
scamming?
Well, okay.
I'm just thinking of like juvenile Hyle, like running like grifts on the street corner.
It's like grifts on my
game.
parents, essentially, like blackmailing them into doing more work than they asked for, doing household chores out of nowhere, and then like holding out my palm, like with my thumb, greasing it, saying like, hey, you know, it would be great if you could like swing $5 my way. I'm trying to save up for a Nintendo 64. Yeah, once I learned that the Donkey Kong Country Donkey Kong was going to be in Mario Kart 64, which I learned like the week Donkey Kong Country 3 came out. So it was like playing Donkey Kong Country 3, trying to beat it, and also trying to procure enough funds to get an N64 before Mario Kart 64 came out in the US in February of 97. So, yeah, it was just a lot of that. But I got one, and I got Mario Kart 64. But another thing also happened in February of 1997. Lucasfilm began to release the 20th anniversary and now much reviled special editions of the Star Wars trilogy in theaters. And those were released in intervals up through mid-March of 97. And I suddenly found that I had a gateway into Star Wars, both catching it at the right time and in the midst of a renewed cultural importance, because Star Wars was everywhere all of a sudden, unlike anything I had experienced in my life up until that point. And being that I had a new Nintendo 64, I was susceptible to one of the very first N64 games and one of the non-DKU games that I would be susceptible to, and that was LucasArts' Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. And I bring this up because Shadows of the Empire was actually a multimedia project that was released in 1996, but the event itself and all of its related merchandise sort of got swept up into the hype, into the maelstrom of the special editions. So what Shadows of the Empire was the idea was that they would tell the story of what happened between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and have all of the related tie-ins that a movie would normally get, only without the movie. So we had the novel, there was a comic book series, and then there was the video game. And each one would tell a different aspect of that story, kind of focusing on a different corner of the universe, the Star Wars galaxy at the time, between the two movies. And the novel was told from the perspectives of Luke and Leia and Lando and all of the movie characters, all of the heroes from the films. And the comic series was from the perspective of Boba Fett, who's transporting the frozen and carbonite Han Solo to Jabba the Hutt. And the video game starred a new character, a smuggler and associate of Han and Lando named Dash Rendar. And the hook to all of this that sort of blew my mind was that Shadows of the Empire at the time was considered the official story. It was canon with the movies, because growing up, I always knew that various media was never actually canon with each other, right? Like I mentioned the real Ghostbusters. That introduced me to the Ghostbusters movie, which became my favorite movie of all time when I was old enough to understand the comedy and just didn't take it so dead seriously. But the real Ghostbuster cartoon, that wasn't the official that wasn't the official continuation of the Ghostbusters movies. That was just this, kids cartoon they did based on it. The Ninja Turtles cartoon was a different continuity from the comics it originated from, and the live action movies and the video games. I mean, it was understood what was like the more important thing in the franchise. Like, the original medium would sometimes be the canon that all others would derive from, but it never swung the other way. Like, the comics would rarely influence, like the cartoons would rarely influence the comics, or, it would be kept separate and lesser than. And I was a video game fan, who watched all of the Mario cartoons from the late 1980s and early 1990s. And I knew those animated adventures didn't count. Like they informed my opinion of Mario and a supporting cast and the Mushroom Kingdom in ways that would later be contradicted by what Nintendo would establish, and that would bug me. But, even as a 6-year-old who owned way too many VHS tapes of the cartoons, I knew that the only real Mario and Luigi were the ones who appeared when I turned on my NES.
I definitely had a stumbling block with this that you did not, because I think, like, Mario, I had seen the cartoon first before even playing the game, and I was trying to... Like, this was a problem I had historically with, like, every video game television adaptation, where I would try to reconcile in my brain, like, okay, well, if I tilt my head sideways, I can kind of think of this as being the way it happened. Like, I think the only thing that, like, where I have to kind of throw up my hands is the Super Mario Brothers movie, but independently, right, yeah. I still love it anyway.
Yeah, like, and I'm not saying, like, these are universal experiences, right? Like, I fully expect people to, like, little kids fan wanking. I mean, that's an inappropriate term for little kids, but you know what I mean? Like, they would go out of their way to try to make it all work if they were the adventurous sort. But for me, like, I guess the way I was exposed to media properties at this young age, I just knew, like, the continuity never, like, crossed over between the mediums. They were always separate. I think, getting into Batman too, like, the first thing I saw was the Adam West Batman, and then I saw the Michael Keaton Batman, and then I read the comics. So it's kind of like, yeah, these are all separate, and none of them influence each other, except draw, like, inspiration, obviously, from the comics, which came first. But, when I got into the Star Wars trilogy in 97, and then having Shadows of the Empire at the same time, I remember buying a guidebook in the bookstore, called The Essential Guide to Characters, which went into everything in the Star Wars galaxy. All the characters from the movies, the novels, comics, cartoons, and video games. And I learned that in Star Wars, everything counted. Like, this is when I found out that Han and Leia, at the time, had twins and then a third child who they named Anakin, which would be really weird. Like, it'd be like naming, your son Adolf.
He still did murder people.
Right. Yeah, but no, the Anakin Solo was a character. I learned that the Emperor came back as a clone. They would never repeat that plot. Oh, no, I learned about characters like... I learned about characters like Grand Admiral Thrawn and Mara Jade, and all of the events that happened after the movies ended. This was too much to wrap my head around, honestly. And, when they jettisoned the entirety of the expanded universe in 2014, prepping for The Force Awakens, I didn't really mourn too much of it, except for Shadows of the Empire. Because, to me, the 13-year-old who got into Star Wars in early 1997, Shadows of the Empire was just as essential as Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. It was the fourth major Star Wars story. Before the prequels, before anything else, there was Shadows of the Empire. And that's the way I became a Star Wars fan. And I knew it wasn't great literature or anything like that. I mean, it was pulpy, kind of trashy tie-in material to a space opera that honestly, like, they're not great screenplays or anything. They're wonderful movies. But, you know, I'm not deluded here. I'm not a deluded nerd who's saying like, this belongs alongside the works of Austen or Dickens or Hemingway. Like, it is what it is. But it was fun. And, you know, like all media properties that we're fans of, it was fun. But, you know, I bring all of this up, Cameron, because I realize this is a long, meandering way to get to the point. Throughout all of this, throughout me being a Star Wars fan, I had another great passion of the late 1990s. I don't know if you know about this, but I was a fan of the Donkey Kong universe. And, you know, I never once considered that the Donkey Kong Country cartoon was in any way an official continuation of what happened in the games. Even when I read the listing, when I found out about the cartoon, I read the listing in TV Guide and I saw there's a Donkey Kong Country cartoon premiering like that weekend. I never sat there and thought this will be in canon with the games that I love. I was like, oh my God, they're adapting Donkey Kong Country for a cartoon. I probably didn't think of it in those terms, but that's like what was going on in my brain. And, you know, and ultimately that's okay because, I don't know if you knew about this, Cameron, but I didn't much care for the cartoon at the time.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what in DK Vine's 20-year plus history would have told me otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, blowing some minds here on this episode. And honestly, like, I was probably too old when it premiered. Too old and too in love with Rare's take on Donkey Kong and the characters they created for him. I wasn't as young and impressionable as I was when I first watched the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. And I allowed that to kind of inform some of my opinions on how Mario's universe worked. But, you know, even when I would daydream later on about maybe one day getting to write, say, a Donkey Kong Country comic book, like for Archie Comics or something, even in my wildest fantasies where I would get to do something like that, I never thought that would be canon to the games either. So I wasn't like holding myself up on any pedestal. I wasn't like thinking of my own works as important. I was like, yeah, that wouldn't be canon. It wouldn't be worthy of being canon because it wouldn't be a video game.
I feel like comics are also like, even when they are ostensibly canon, like, they are the first thing on the chopping block when a property gets revived, because, say a long dead TV show comes back for a short run in comics, you know that 9 times out of 10, an official, like, televised revival or, you know, reunion movie or something will ignore that because they will just assume not enough people read the comics to care.
Yeah, that happened with the X-Files. They did the official X-Files season 10 in comic books, and they explained why the alien invasion didn't happen in 2012, and they did all sorts of things. They revealed the lone gunmen weren't dead. They faked their death, which is what fans really wanted to hear. And then they eventually did a X-Files season 10 and season 11 for real, and they were terrible, and they also ignored the comics completely, making them impossible to be canon. So, but having something, an ancillary piece of media outside of video games be canon, that's not exactly without precedent for Nintendo, at least these days, because I think you could make the case that the Splatoon mangas are canon to the games, among some other things, maybe. I
don't know where Nintendo stands on this now, but the example that comes to my mind that's most relevant to us is the Star Fox Adventures manga that explains what happened to Falco between Adventures and 64.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not saying like fans can't incorporate this stuff into their personal canon if they want, but it's never going to be recognized along like the way the video games are by studios unless somebody is like a huge fan of one of the mangas or something, and then they're able to sneak it in. But it's rare that it happens. A good example of it happening outside of video games is the Doctor Who franchise. I'm just peppering this full of references for Chris Allcock to sink his teeth into if he happens to listen to this.
I'm just imagining him frantically fast forwarding every 5 minutes. No, they said Star Wars, they said Doctor Who, they said Splatoon. Gotta keep going. This will surely reach the part where they talk about my writing by the hour mark.
The joke is we're not going to talk about it. This is going to take another 17 months. No, but Doctor Who is another thing that tries to keep everything in canon, but it doesn't really do it unless you get a hardcore fan like Stephen Moffat, who was showrunner of the new Doctor Who between series 5 and, what was it? 10? I think 10. But he incorporated elements of the audio dramas, the comics. He referenced all this stuff from other Doctor Who media. So Doctor Who is kind of like Star Wars in that it does draw upon stuff, and it hasn't had a reboot like Star Wars did in 2014 either, where it just reboots all the expanded stuff and say, okay, now it all counts. Nothing before really counted. Sorry about that. But there's never been anything for Nintendo like a Shadows of the Empire level canon equivalent. And there's been nothing like Shadows of the Empire in the Donkey Kong universe, at least on the Donkey Kong side. The Viva Pinata cartoon was made with Rare's input, and later games in a series did bring elements of that cartoon into it in a much bolder way than, say, the Donkey Kong 64 team bringing in crystal coconuts but tweaking them to their liking. I do argue that the Viva Pinata cartoon is canon with the DKU. It even bears the Rare logo. So I think if there's any piece of media before Sea of Thieves, it's the Viva Pinata cartoon for sure. But the Viva Pinata cartoon, I mean, it is what it is. It was cute. It was a little frothy, it was a children's cartoon.
It's purposely very divorced from the tone of the games themselves.
Yes. And Rare made allowances for how it could work, they did a pretty good job for working it in for what it was, but there wasn't that level of integration that Shadows of the Empire had, because Shadows of the Empire would influence the special editions as well, because Dash Rendar's ship, the Outrider, they put that in Star Wars, the special edition, Episode 4, A New Hope, flying away from Mos Eisley. When you see the pan of Mos Eisley, there's the Outrider flying away. So, Shadows of the Empire had some integration, even though it's not considered canon now. The ship is still canon. But Shadows was also like this arcane knowledge for me as a budding Star Wars fan in 97. It was this leg up I had on the generation that grew up with Star Wars that maybe didn't keep up with it after the original trilogy left theaters. So, it's oh, you were in theaters when Darth Vader told Luke, I am your father. Well, that's great. That's great. Good for you. But I bet you didn't know that Dash Rendar fought in the Battle of Hoth, and he took down IG-88 on Ord Mantell. So, who's the bigger Star Wars fan, huh? So it was just this kind of cool, haha, I'm privy to what happened between the movies. And, never really had that with the DKU, besides maybe, scouring Rare's classic website looking for weird canon from Lee Loveday, off the cuff remarks like Bumper the Badger is in prison.
Did you know Maya's having an affair with TJ Combo?
Oh, is that a real
Tusk
one?
isn't in on it.
Is that a real one?
That was kind of implied in Uncle Tusk, yeah.
Oh, wow. Hate to think of that combo breaker. I say all of this, Cameron, because I feel like I finally have my Shadows of the Empire for the DKU. And it's called Sea of Thieves, Athena's Fortune. Ah! That was the point. Athena's Fortune is a novel by a friend of DK Vine, Chris Allcock. I think I can call him a friend of DK Vine. A well-meaning acquaintance, someone who hasn't turned outwardly hostile towards us yet. Chris Allcock, he wrote into Scribes back in the days when I would. He's old like me. And unlike me, who decided to bum around Los Angeles and ended up a burned out husk, labeling himself a Donkey Kong journalist to kind of soothe his poor life choices, Chris actually joined Rare in 2003 and worked there up until 2014, where he took a brief hiatus before rejoining the studio shortly thereafter, where he helped with Rare Replay and the conception of Sea of Thieves. And he's left Rare now to focus full-time on his writing career, which includes writing novels for Rare and continuing to shape the lore of Sea of Thieves. So, Athena's Fortune came out, I think, was it October 2018?
Asking the wrong person.
Damn it, Cameron. I thought you were going to have your facts on this. It was sometime around there.
I have enough trouble keeping the time frame in the book straight, let alone real life timetables.
I have enough trouble keeping track of what month it is now. It's
or
true.
How many years Sea of Thieves has actually been out. That's another one I have problems with.
Oh, almost every week now, somebody comments on those videos of the Skullduggers performing at E3 2016 on our YouTube channel, and they're like, wait, how is this from 2016? Sea of Thieves came out in 2018, and I have to explain to them, well, you see, Sea of Thieves was at E3 before it came out. There's also a technical alpha. It was in development for a while. It didn't just materialize out of thin air like alchemy. I think it was scheduled to come out around Talk Like a Pirate Day 2018, and then it was pushed back to October. I think that's what happened, but
checking online, I'm seeing a publishing data in October 2018, so that's...
All right! I'm factually correct! Yeah! Woo! No corrections on the next episode until Chris writes in with all the things we got wrong. Anyway, it came out in October 2018, and we've somehow not done an episode about it until now. 'Cause I read it when it came out, and then episode topics kept cropping up, and so I was like, okay, we'll push it back a little bit. Oh, it's E3 2019? Okay, well, we'll get to it after E3. Oh, okay, we have to talk about this, we have to talk about that. Banjos and Smash. Oh, what's this? Ukulele and the Impossible Layers coming out. And Chris Sutherland and Gavin Price gonna appear on the show. Okay, what? Grant Kirkhope's gonna appear on the show. Oops, season done. We'll get to it the next season, etc., etc., etc. But now we're discussing it. We're finally discussing it. And I'm glad that I had to reread it, Cameron. I really am glad that I sat down during quarantine and read through it again, because I read this initially before Tall Tales. Is that accurate? It came out before Tall Tales?
It did, and I remember that because, like you, I had to reread the book several times. I think right before this episode was my third time rereading it, because whenever it kept looking like we might do the episode, I would realize that unlike... the thing about a game is if I do an episode about a game and I forget what happened, I can just, I can, let's check that one bit on YouTube and, refresh my brain. It'll all come back to me. I can't do that with a book. So I just felt like I couldn't keep doing it justice. Couldn't do it justice in an episode unless I had, read the entire thing right before an episode. But I remember... Yeah. I remember it happening before Tall Tales because each time I reread it, certain things made more sense because context was then given in something new that had happened in the time between me reading it last.
Yeah, so I read this in kind of a fugue state because I initially sped through it because I was like, we got to do the episode for it. And I didn't really get to enjoy it. And I recognized I wasn't taking my time with it. And for me, like, it's hard for me to read a fiction book. Most of what I read is nonfiction because for me, I like to visualize everything and I like to have every detail, concrete in my head before I can move on. And so like, because somebody like me who is probably slight OCD when it comes to things like this, I tend to obsess over like pages and I'll keep rereading the same page over and over again. And it is hard for me to move on, where when I read something like nonfiction, I can just breeze through it. It's not a problem. But to read a fiction book, especially a fiction book that matters to something that means as much to me as the shared rare universe, the Donkey Kong universe, or Sea of Thieves, however you want to define this, this piece of literature, I tend to struggle. And I'm like, whoa, this is why I stopped reading fiction after college, because I have problems with it. It's weird. And, but speeding through it the first time and then getting to reread it a second time, I didn't have that problem. Like, I had the foundation there. So I was able to just read it like a normal person reads a book and pick up on the details I missed before and really have a good relationship with the book. And, so I'm glad that, like, it shook out the way it did, reading it, plain tall tales, and then getting to reread it, because it meant so much more to me this time around. And I'm not saying, like, you at home who haven't read it, who might want to read it, need to go through the same process. I think you'll enjoy it even without ever having played Sea of Thieves. And in fact, I'm going to make the recommendation that if you're thinking about getting into Sea of Thieves, now that it's on Steam as of this last week, you might want to pick up this book first and read it. Think of it as the instruction manual story that just happens to be 264 pages, because I think it will enrich your enjoyment of Sea of Thieves and the lore of Sea of Thieves way more than just playing the game cold will ever do. We'll get into that and the reasons why, but yeah, for me, there's so much significance to this book as a result of my second read through. And I actually got a little bit emotional towards the end. So if Chris Allcock ever wants to hold it over to me that he made me cry a little bit, he can do that, because Chris Allcock made me cry a little bit. So this isn't the first piece of expanded Sea of Thieves literature that's in canon with the games. We should like clarify that. And if you're a Kongversation listener and have been for a while, you know that Cameron and I already discussed Tales from the Sea of Thieves, which is presented as an in-universe journal or ship ledger that's kind of passed down to the modern day. And it deals with the characters. I say deals, it involves the characters in the written words of Captain Flameheart and the character of Belle, among others. And then there's the Sea of Thieves comic mini-series by Jeremy Whiteley, which, by the way, you can win an autographed copy of Sea of Thieves #1 by Jeremy Whiteley. Wow, shit, what did they have to do? Which contest was that one? Was that finding the missing episode of season 6 of The Kongversation, which nobody's done yet. So you can do that. You can win an autographed copy. I got it in my vault here. It's under lock and key. It's gold hoarder key too, so only I can open it. But the Sea of Thieves comic miniseries dealt with DeMarco and Lessetti Singh, who are actually the twins of Ramsey Singh, who is one half of the main protagonist of the Athena's Fortune novel. And this isn't really a spoiler, because this is common knowledge at this point, but Ramsey goes on to become the ghostly pirate lord seen in Sea of Thieves, the game itself.
I mean, the book was promoted saying it was the story of the pirate
lord,
so...
I mean, it's like spoiling that Palpatine comes back in Rise of Skywalker. It's like, it's out there. Sorry. Like, that's what the movie's about. He comes back in a clone body. So, you know, I particularly adored the Tales from the Sea of Thieves book. I loved the, like, in-universe, like, context of it. I like, it was my favorite piece of tie-in media for Sea of Thieves. But I would have to say, that Athena's Fortune is absolutely my favorite of the three, hands and hooks down. Because if you're a pirate, you know, you might have one or the other. Now, this isn't me disparaging the others, but Athena's Fortune has a leg and peg leg, because if you're a pirate, up on all of them, in my opinion, because it's a 264-page novel that really allows you to get in the heads and skulls, because there's, you know, if you're a scout, of two crews across two different time periods.
It's either crews because they're pirates.
You didn't. I was done. I was done.
I was just beginning.
I'm just trying to annoy Chris Allcock in case he's listening. I'm just trying to stretch this out as much as I can.
Oh, well, then we have to talk about Ramses and his crew, the Devil's Wing, and
yeah, Ramses Singe, the pirate lord.
His tombs of resurrection.
No, there's the crew of Ramses' ship, the Magpie's Wing, and there's the crew of the ship, the Unforgiven, which includes the other main character, the young pirate Lorena. It is Lorena, right? We've settled on Lorena.
We had tried to have this discussion with Chris Allcock, who semi-regularly crashes our Sea of Thieves streams.
He literally gate crashes them and joins the party chat. And then all of a sudden we've got the disembodied voice of Chris Allcock while we're trying to sail in Sea of Thieves.
In his defense, we don't stop him.
We don't stop him. We welcome it. We invite it. But, you know, it could lead to tragedy one day.
But, I have been kind of, in the long road it's taken to get to this episode, I have been, like, not so subtly prodding him every time he shows up, like, hey, how do you pronounce these characters' names so I don't make an ass of myself in this episode? And the first time I asked him about Lorena, he responded that it rhymed with mariner, like Larina. But I think later on he clarified that, like, people have kind of just settled on Lorena, so it's Lorena.
Yeah, I don't know. He might have been trying to gaslight us, too.
He may have been messing with me, or it may have just been that's the pronunciation that stuck, but Lorena seems to be what we go with.
It flows off the tongue better than Larina. Because Larina just sounds like larynx. Like, I don't know. But yeah, so... they jump between the two time periods. So like one chapter will be about Ramsey's crew, then it's Lorena, then Ramsey. And initially, like when I first started reading it, I remember like really getting into Ramsey's crew immediately. And then the chapter ended and I realized, oh, now it's this next chapter is going to be about a whole new set of characters. I'm basically starting a second book here. And I had trouble initially warming up to Lorena as a result, because I felt like her crew was kind of interloping into the story I had just started getting invested in. I got over that and I really like came to love both crews, and both are like equally valid and important to the story that's being told. Obviously, like anybody coming into the book who is already a Sea of Thieves fan will be more invested in the story of Ramsey, because that's where like the lore is, the deep lore when it comes to like how the Sea of Thieves was discovered in, I was going to say the modern day, but like in the golden age of piracy, how it was rediscovered, and all, like how all these events that play out in the game were sort of seeded.
And even then, just going in, Ramsey is the only known quantity among the main cast when you first start reading the book. More reveal themselves as the book goes on, but he's kind of your anchor point if you're already invested in the lore of Sea of Thieves.
Anchor point. Because you're pirates. Yeah, but, I think, like, having a crew that's closer to the modern day, you're like, well, I don't want to be reading about this crew because they're closer to the time of the game. And if I wanted that, I would just play the game because the crew I'm invested in is my crew, right? But you will get over that. You will care just as much about Lorena. And in fact, like, you're more invested in her by the end because you kind of know the fate of Ramsey, right? You know ultimately what happens to him, but with Lorena and her crew, you don't really know how it's going to shake out for them. So it becomes a little bit more emotionally fraught by the end of it for them.
They also are characters, which I think is what helped sell me on it. Like, their journey is very purposely meant to echo, like, a player's journey on their first way out through the Sea of Thieves, but Lorena and the crew she joins up with are very much their own characters, and they don't make decisions you would. And that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, and also, like, I think what eventually sold me on the format and how the book alternates, like, there are 20 chapters, 10 chapters for each crew, and, they're never concurrent. They always jump back and forth. I think what sold me on that was just because I'm a Lost fan. I'm a fan of the show Lost, and I love the finale, and I'm gonna fight people about it. Come on, come at me, people. Come at me in the comments because I love the finale to Lost, and it all makes sense if you were paying attention. But, Lost, of course, infamously utilized the flashback conceit for the episode. So you would have the main action on the island, and then you flash back in an episode to a character's life before the island. And that informs, like, how that character wound up to be the broken mess that they are on the island.
And it, of course, tends to thematically resonate with whatever is going on in the present day that the main plot is following, which is also what happens in this book.
Yes. So, like, once I started thinking about it in lost flashback terms, I started hearing the sound effects. Whenever we would jump chapters, I would just immediately insert it ultimately becomes the sound when they move the island and they start flashing through time to signify a time jump, but that's the sound they use for the flashback. You don't know that in the early seasons. So there's a lot in this book that actually reminded me of Lost, and Chris Allcock, being a fan of genre media as he is, I really want to ask him how much of that was intentional, because especially, like, the explanations for how characters heal so fast in a Sea of Thieves, and I was just like, that's the island. This is literally the island from Lost, and I'm okay with that. I think that's brilliant. Like, even getting to the Sea of Thieves, you have to snake through the Devil's Shroud, and you have to have the right coordinates. That's how you get to the island. And I mean, this has been baked into Sea of Thieves lore since the start, but it's no wonder Sea of Thieves resonates so much with me, because it's Lost vis-a-vis Rare. So it's like, yeah, this is right up my fucking alley. Thank you. Anyway, yeah, so the format, like, once you get to, like, chapter 3 or chapter 4, like, the format becomes old hat and you welcome it. And it honestly keeps it so varied, because what Chris Allcock had to do, like, I always have to say his full name too. I don't know why that is. He's like a brand unto himself, Chris Allcock. But
there's a trademark at the end of Allcock, like, implicitly. You can't hear it, but it's there.
What's remarkable, I think, about the task that was set out for him was that he had to essentially write 2 books, right? He had to write 2 books in one, and both had to carry emotional weight. So he had, like, 2 sets of characters, 2 time periods,
4 main characters across each. So
yes,
8
full
main characters.
Full galleon crews, plus all the ancillary characters along the way. And then it all had to tie together in the end in a semi-profound way, which it did. And
tying
so,
into a game that hadn't been out when he wrote it, by the way.
Right. Of course, there was, the technical alpha, and of course, he was privy to it, to the builds at Rare. But there's some stuff he had to wing. He had to Magpie's wing. And it is remarkable. Like, there's very few things in the book that you have to squint to make sense with the game. There are a couple things, but ultimately, like, you can chalk that up to, well, at this point in time, the weaponsmith, on, Sanctuary Outpost was named Wilbur, and now Wilbur left before the events of the game.
Yeah, I think that's like mainly the main disparity I would encounter with Lorena's portion of the story, which is just the nature of how Sea of Thieves is currently, is that there is like a strict gender division in terms of like your merchants and other people in the outpost. Like, oh, all the weaponsmiths are women, all the shipwrights are women, all the gold hoarders are men, all the order.
Right, and it's done so, like, there's just the little cheeky, jokey kind of way that if you're a weaponsmith, or then your name will start with W, right? If you're a shipwright, your name will start with S, and that's if you're a gold hoarder, your name starts with H. So it just goes down the line. If you're a tavern keeper, your name starts with T. And Wilbur keeps with that conceit, but, all the weaponsmiths in the game are women. So
it also, we have the out that Salty is a known quantity. He's a shopkeeper, and he doesn't really fit the conventions that currently exist in the game either, but he's historically been around. So we have it pre-established that the state of the Sea of Thieves as we see it is not the state of the Sea of Thieves as it has always been.
Right. Lorena's portions do take place, I think, before the game starts. We'll get into the timeline of it all, because it is a lot to take in when you factor in the comics and the game and tall tales. There's just so much lore for this game. And Chris Allcock did say, like, Sea of Thieves is now the Rare game that has the most lore attached to it. And he's not wrong. It is, like, I went cross-eyed a few times, and I would have to put down the novel and pick up the graphic novel, the collection of the 4 Sea of Thieves comics, in the miniseries, and I'd have to like thumb through that. Like, does that check out? Does that add up?
There may be more that has actually happened in the few years Sea of Thieves has existed, and I mean actually happened, like as in written down, very clear, black and white, than like the entirety that we have taken as implied in over 2 decades of Donkey Kong lore, and that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, Donkey Kong lore is huge and massive, but yeah, Sea of Thieves has definitely already outpaced it, in just a few short years. So, spoilers from here on out, right? I don't want to be beholden to, like, I want to save people from, I want them to experience the way the novel plays out, because I feel like we can't discuss it if that's the case. So, if you do want to read it and you don't want to be spoiled, and honestly, I don't want you to be spoiled for this, because you're going to be spoiled for some things already, and some information's already out there, especially like what happens to maybe a crew member, or whatever.
And some of this
like
you can honestly just guess for yourself, but we're not going to cement that for you.
Yeah, if a character's name is Rathbone, you might kind of put 2 and 2 together when you see where his character is starting to tread. But, yeah, I like, there is some emotional punches, a couple gut punches near the end, in a very, like, melancholy way, like the end of Lost. Like, it's a happy ending, but I bawl every time I watch it. So, I guess, spoilers from here on out. If you're interested in getting into Sea of Thieves now that it's on Steam, if you're like, this is my chance to play it, I would recommend, let me just say, I would recommend ordering this book ASAP. reading through it. You'll get through it in no time, and you'll understand so much about Sea of Thieves, about that little sliver of the shared rare universe, and it will make the game and the characters that you meet along the way mean so much more to you. So,
and it's a great book independent of the game itself, which I think is such a hard tightrope to walk with tie-in media, especially for video games.
Yeah, like I said, you can start with the novel, and not ever have played the game. Now, rereading the novel after you played the game, you'll appreciate elements of it more. It's definitely worth a reread no matter what. But, yeah, I would say start with the novel, then play the game. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to take my advice, stop listening to the episode now and come back once you've read the novel. And honestly, maybe play the game a little bit and experience Tall Tales, because we're going to be getting into it. All right. Spoilers start here. All right. So, Cameron, how do you want to do this? You want to talk about Ramsey's crew first, and then, like, the story that happens there, and then jump to Lorena's crew, or what is the best way?
I think let's go over Ramsey's crew first and talk a little bit about each character and kind of see where that takes us. We can see if we want to go through just their personalities or where their entire story goes.
Yeah, we're not going to be getting into everything that happened beat for beat, because I do, even if you are spoiled and you decided to still listen to this, I do want to save some things. We're going to be touching upon broad plot points, but
we made a 3-part episode out of Diddy Kong Racing. We're not going to cover everything in this book. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And you know, Cameron did diligent note taking when we first thought we were going to do this episode.
To the extent that Google's digital DRM wanted to stop me from copying more passages out of the book for myself to read.
But there is 15 pages of transcripts. And I'm like, yeah, we're not talking about every chapter, Cameron. But this is good. This is a good foundation. But we're gonna do the Cliff Notes version of this. So yeah, Ramsey Singh is your main protagonist in the past, and of course he's the future pirate lord. And the interesting thing about Ramsey to me is that he essentially abandons his wife and kids. So I love like the moral complexity of Sea of Thieves in general, because it is about a bunch of pirates, a bunch of criminals, a bunch of murderous ne'er-do-wells, yeah. But they're within those ranks, there is also kind of moral shades between all of the characters. So you can be like a really villainous pirate, or you can have a code, and you can be seduced by piracy for more altruistic, noble reasons. And Ramsey is kind of complex in that I think he starts off being a little bit more of a dirtbag than he winds up. He definitely has an arc, and he's basically an addict when it comes to piracy. He fell in love with a woman back home, and it's not established where his home is in the book, but if you read the comic book, the tavern that's referenced, Rowena's, is it Rowena?
I said in my head like Rowena, but I think it could be
Rowena. Okay.
I don't know which one it is. I'm sorry.
Yeah. She is the tavern keeper of a tavern Ramsey buys back home, and you think, is back home? Is it somewhere in Europe? Is it? But in the comics, it's an island, I think, somewhere in the Caribbean. Because it's said that it's on an island outside of the Sea of Thieves.
I mean, it's kind of a running theme with Sea of Thieves in general, that geography is kept vague by design.
Yes, I believe the entrance to Sea of Thieves, the realm of Sea of Thieves, the outside entrance in our realm is somewhere in the British Virgin Isles. We figured that out through
like you can draw a big circle on a map as to generally where things are, but you can't put a pin where they are, is how I would say.
But they keep things vague, but I think this is just like there are settlers in the Caribbean in the time of like the New World and the Age of Exploration and the Golden Age of Piracy. And so it's very like, Pirates of the Caribbean sort of situation. But Ramsey's living there with wife and kids, but he keeps getting drawn back to the sea, and then he wants to get to the Sea of Thieves, which is this like rumor, or he doesn't even know it's the Sea of Thieves. It's not called the Sea of Thieves at this point. He just wants to see what's beyond the Devil's Shroud, which is this mysterious fog that actually contains the realm. He doesn't know it this time. He just wants to see what's inside the Devil's Shroud, because there's all sorts of legends and hearsay and tall tales. And so he ultimately concocts this plan to navigate the shroud. He enlists help, which we'll get to with a crewmate of his, or eventual crewmate of his.
Yeah, I'd say like each one of these crewmates generally has a motivation for wanting to be in the Sea of Thieves, and I'd say like Ramsey is like the call of adventure is kind of his thing.
Yeah.
He's very clearly like not so much in it for the profit.
I would say he's in it a little bit for the profit at first, but it's the influence of one of his crew members that really brings out the more altruistic side of him, and the more like the more like adventurer and the more good-natured version of a pirate in Sea of Thieves. That's Ramsey. That's what he becomes. But at the beginning of the novel, his only existing crew member is Rathbone. So, I think Ramsey is kind of morally gray at first. But he becomes, what passes for a heroic figure in Sea of Thieves eventually. But yeah, Ramsey's, I think, original sin is that he basically abandons his family for long stretches of time. The novel doesn't really get into it. It never, like, he comes back after his initial voyage into the Sea of Thieves to find that his wife is essentially left with the kids. And it's never really addressed much further. In the comics, it says that he did come back, and if he did not reunite with his wife, he definitely reformed a relationship with his children, and taught them the ways of piracy until he made his final voyage into the Sea of Thieves and became the ghostly figure that we know. But, yeah, it's kind of like you form one impression in the novel, and then the comics shift your perception a little bit that, oh, maybe he didn't completely like not have a relationship with them at that point. And actually, it's inferred so much at the end of the novel when you find out what Athena's fortune is and why he named his eventual ship that. But we'll save that for the end. But Ramsey is the main protagonist in the past. He wants to get through the Devil's Shroud, and his existing crew member, the one he sails with, just, in the Caribbean as a pirate of the Caribbean I said Caribbean and Caribbean. I seem to fluctuate between both. I don't care. I like the way both sound. His other crew member is Rathbone. And,
gee, what do you think a guy named like that, whose name sounds like Anger Skeleton?
Yeah. It would be like, wait, Darth Vader is a bad guy? What? Rathbone. Rathbone becomes the villain of the piece. Both pieces, actually. Rathbone is a figure in both the past and the quote-unquote present, the present of Lorena's portions of the book. But it's a slow reveal to show how Rathbone becomes the gold hoarder, the fearsome, skelly lord that was so prominent in Sea of Thieves media.
And again, like, so I guess we can come back to this after we get into his character, but I did want to ask you something about this character.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. You saw this coming, right?
So, in my initial read-through, this was before Tall Tales. This was before we actually met the Gold Hoarder in-game. I liked Rathbone's character for the first half of Chapter 1. I was like, he seems interesting. And he seemed like, you know, he's like, he comes from a wealthy family. He's like educated and he's like proper a little bit. I got the sense that he maybe was like in like the naval forces at one point. That's never really established, but that was my impression of him, that he might have been like a military man at one point before he
what establishes like he carries himself well, sort of.
Yes. And I was like, oh, he's interesting. And then like near the end of Chapter 1, he reveals himself to be a male chauvinist, and I'm like, okay, all right, well, not so much for you, Rathbone, but I was still interested by his character. And yeah, like, of course I saw it coming eventually, but I think when I try to read something, I try to shut my brain off, my investigative, interpretive side as much as possible, to just fully invest in the story that's being told. And eventually the writer in me, the screenwriter in me will come out to play and say, oh, let me put the pieces together for you. I'm terrible, Cameron. When you go to the movies with me, I'm whispering what's going to happen like 20 minutes beforehand because I'm seeing the screenplay in my head. Like, you know, it's awful. But,
So, I saw the twist coming, but I think I had a little bit of help doing so. Because,
what's that?
In, I believe it was 2018, Rare did a New York Comic-Con panel that I happened to be in the audience for, where they were talking about this book. And in their presentation, well, first they showed the cover, which has the Gold Hoarder on the cover front and center. They talked about how the book would kind of go into the backstory of the Pirate Lord Ramsey, showing a pic, and they had a slideshow presentation, a PowerPoint up, and showing images next to each other. And in one of the slides was Ramsey in his ghostly form, like his ghostly render, where I think he's like kind of stroking his beard, and you see the knives sticking out of his back. And immediately next to that render was a picture of the Gold Hoarder with his hand outstretched. Like, these are two generic renders of these characters, like, for general purposes. But when you put them next to each other, it just looks like the Gold Hoarder stabbing Ramsey in the back. And
which never actually happens in the novel.
That's not covered here. You don't actually get to see the point A to point B of how Ramsey dies, even though you can look at his back in game and make a hazard a guess. And then sometime later, like right before the presentation ended, they, as a special treat for everyone, did a live reading of a passage from Athena's Fortune. And the passage they picked was the end of, I think it was, is it chapter 3 when they return to the tavern?
Yes, I want to say, because there's the jump.
It's like, I want to say chapter 2, but it's Ramsey's crew's second chapter. Yes, it is chapter 3. I'm looking at my
because there's a year jump in time, I think, right?
Yeah.
And then
so the passage they elected to share with us was the one that ends with Rathbone selling the path through the Devil's Shroud to Stitcher Jim.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's when you realize Rathbone is going to be an antagonist, and he's a piece of shit. But you know, I was like, Chris Allcock's writing was deft enough that I was enjoying his character, and I was like, oh, you know, I'm just gonna take this character at face value and think, you know, he's a good guy. And then he was kind of shitty to Mercia, and I was like, fuck you, future Gold Hoarder.
It's at the very least, like, I followed his character, even though I kind of guessed where he was ultimately going to end up, you still... It's like how... I'd bring up Star Wars again, but, like, the point A to point B is still interesting because Rathbone kind of sucks, but he also doesn't seem like scum of the earth. Absolutely.
No. He's a pirate.
He's a pirate, he's a chauvinist, he's very clearly out for himself. But
I would say that he is a man of his time that does not fit into the more forward-thinking ideals that Ramsey and Mercia set out for the Sea of Thieves to exist under. He is kind of like a man of the 1600s, who you can kind of see like the sickness that overcomes him. I'm not talking about the skeleton curse, but his greed. It's interesting the way it develops through the novel, where like there's this detailed dream sequence that it like talks about him like dreaming about sailing on just an ocean of gold coins, and like how his greed progresses. The more successful he becomes, the more like he needs to fill it, because the success means nothing to him. It's not filling that that piece where your soul would be. So he just wants more and more. It's basically like anybody who's ever experienced any success in their life, and they're like, oh, so if I get to this point in my career, or if I find somebody and I like find a significant other and I get married, then I'll be happy. And then you get to that point and you're like, okay, I'm not happy yet per se, but if I get to, it's like anybody who's battled depression like I have will kind of relate a little bit with what Rathbone's going through, because you always think like, I'll be happy one day if and then these arbitrary goals for your life, and then you reach them, and then you're like, I'm still not happy. And then you realize like, oh wait, the happiness that I'm seeking is being held for me because of my depression. It's not because I haven't achieved something. So like, I'm not saying Rathbone's experiencing depression, but he is clearly unfulfilled in ways that he's using gold, as a means to fill it, and it's never enough for him. And he's an interesting character in a way that the Gold Hoarder as presented in game would never be as interesting if we didn't have this backstory.
Yeah, this isn't like a story of going from mustache twirler to mustache twirler. It's kind of a like fairly normal person in the context of his time, in quotes, going to this like this gold hungry skelly golem, and you kind of need the it's interesting to just watch that go from point A to point B, because
yeah, he really is like Gollum in that, the gold is his precious, and like, Smeagol was like an interesting character. He wasn't out and out bad, but the ring corrupted him in ways, and you still like see
he even has a ring.
Yes. Well, he does steal Ramsey's wedding ring, which he doesnnve have in game though, right?
Well, he loses it over the course of the story again.
Yes. Yeah, I was trying to put together the pieces. So I was like, wait a second. I was going to say it's the ring he has in game, but I was like, no, that wouldn't make sense, because he does have a ring, but it isn't the same ring, because he loses the ring.
I guess we should go over a little bit about, because we focus so much on like Rathbone's endpoint. I guess we can go into a little bit of like what the book establishes about his character when we're not supposed to see the dots forming in our heads. It kind of says like he came from a rich family, he was well educated, and before crewing up with Ramsey, he was a businessman, like a very successful one, but an unscrupulous, underhanded one, and eventually found himself on the wrong side of the law.
Wait a second. Businessmen never find themselves on the wrong side of the law. they just get off and they continue to commit crimes. Oh, the way this was couple hundred years ago. Okay, never mind.
He does have his own successful trading company, so
yeah. He is like kind of like the opposite of Ramsey, and you're like, well, why does Ramsey sail with this guy? But that's established. Like they kind of like fire and ice a little bit, but they complement each other. Like where it's like any good creative partnership. Like it's never meant to last, but for that brief window in time, like they work well together and they pick up each other's slack. Where somebody lacks something, the other brings that forward. It's kind of like the Lennon and McCartney of piracy. Yeah, it's going to be a bitter breakup eventually, but man, they had some good times together while it lasted. You can fill in the blanks who is Lennon and who is McCartney in the situation. I won't do that for you, but yeah, and he's he eventually forms the Gold Hoarders. He founds the Gold Hoarder Trading Company in the novel, which is, you know, alluded to in the tall tale, but you're like, wait a second, is he still in charge of the Gold Hoarders? And here it's firmly established that eventually when he becomes the creepy skeleton dude, he has no more connections with the Gold Hoarders. But
I think it's like a weird case where in game, like the Gold Hoarders will assure like, oh no, we don't have any ties to that guy anymore. But in like some of the other media, I think it's established that yeah, they're just hush hush about it because they know his reputation.
Well, yeah, it's a little vague because I know like in the original comics, I think it was Horus, the Gold Hoarder from Sanctuary Outpost. He's the one who flips out when he finds DeMarco and Lassetti have made it to the Sea of Thieves because they're like, you're the Pirate Lord's son and daughter.
I'm mostly thinking of the Sea of Thieves origin comic that follows a singular Gold Hoarder, and we find out that he's been, like, without going too much into the story, he's been transferring his share of the gold outside of the Sea of Thieves, and he's immediately told, oh, you shouldn't do that because the Gold Hoarder doesn't like gold to leave the Sea of Thieves. And he's going to be pissed. Word's going to get back to him.
So I think it's kind of an off-the-books thing where he's not officially involved with them anymore, but it's sort of like, you know, it's still, he's kind of like operating like a mafia boss at that point, like shaking down the legitimate organization he helped found. And of course we see in the comics, like he does like lead a crew of Skellies, and of course in the game too, because you fight the Skellies in his inner sanctum, but he starts pursuing Lassetti and DeMarco in the comics at the end of it with a crew. So he's got like his Skelly operatives, and then he's still got connections to the Gold Hoarders as well, even though that's kind of like under the table a little bit. But yeah, he is a really interesting villain, and I would say like he is probably now the most complex villain in the DKU outside of K. Rool. Like obviously we know more about his life now than we do even K. Rool, and K. Rool is a lot of like inferred stuff over the years that's been supported and never contradicted in game, but and when I think of like really interesting, ironically meaty villains, I think K. Rool and I think Rathbone now. So
yeah,
and that's not to disparage like Gruntilda or anybody, but yeah.
And it's making me aware of another cool little side effect of this ancillary media fleshing out characters, which is for the longest time we just knew Rathbone as the Gold Hoarder, aka that one piece of concept art that got out early, aka the statue that was at E3 that people did funny things with for photo ops. And now he's this character with all this like added depth and tragedy to him.
Yeah, when you said they did funny things for photo opportunities, the name Rathbone became really unfortunate with what I was picturing. So let's move on to my favorite character in the book, and that is Mercia. And Mercia is the scholarly kind of explorer who befriends Ramsey. Definitely not Rathbone. He befriends Ramsey and is like, hey, I have an idea how to get through the Devil's Shroud. Here's how we do it. We take all of these like small flotation devices. We like chart our way slowly with a ship small enough to make it. And, it's never like 100% explained how she figures it out, but, enough is inferred that you can fill in the blanks. And, so she convinces him to go along with this. And in a way, kind of, I never like read it as an actual romantic connection between the two, but she definitely seduces Ramsey in that she changes his way of thinking, as far as piracy goes, as far as their purpose in this realm that becomes known as the Sea of Thieves. She's definitely like the most positive influence on him. Shan too, to a lesser extent, but, or is it Sean? How do you pronounce his name?
I guess I've been going with Shan, but I don't know. We can just say, like, I'm going with the Lando pronunciation, and you're going with the everybody else in Star Wars pronunciation.
No, I'm going to go with Shan, too, because Sean is, like, it's an Irish name, and Shan is, like...
Sean.
Okay.
Sean. I say it with, like, an implied you. I don't know.
Okay, well, anyway... But Mercia, she, for one thing, she's a vegetarian, so naturally, I'm going to gravitate towards her character because there are so few vegetarian characters that are ever presented in a positive light in media. Usually, like, they're presented as, like, stuck up, or like they just like to complain for like the sake of it. Like, I'm thinking like Angela from The Office, who's presented as a vegetarian just because she can be like just awful about it to others rather than any deep moral convictions.
It's not like a character trait we find out about her to drill in that, oh, she's a contrarian or anything. It's
right. Yeah. And like so often in media, like being a vegetarian is coded as like, oh, you're a pussy, or there's something wrong with you. It's like ugly shorthand that's like cropped up even, recently and stuff. And so to have like arguably like the most positive character in the novel be a vegetarian meant so much to me, weirdly enough, because I think it's like one of the first time, aside from like real world figures, like, oh, again, Paul McCartney is a vegetarian, but like aside from that, it's like, oh wow, like I never thought how much it would mean to me as a vegetarian of almost 20 years to have, it sounds weird to talk about like vegetarian representation, but it did mean a lot to me. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. Mercia is like, she's skeptical, but she's also kind of open to possibilities. She's Mulder and Scully in one. She's analytical, she's scholarly, but she wants to believe. And
like she desperately does not want to use the word magic, but comes around on it fairly quickly, given the evidence around her, as opposed to continuing to make excuses.
Right. She's the one that figures out how to get through the Devil's Shroud. She's the one who like really wants to explore everything within the Sea of Thieves. And then eventually she's kind of enchanted by it. Not like literally enchanted like other characters are, for better or for worse, but she finds like the romantic nature of it all, and she's like, I want to know more. Ramsey is like, they both like, I think, drive each other a little bit. Like, Mercia changes Ramsey's way of thinking, and then Ramsey like changes her way of thinking.
I think he grounds her a little bit, and he opens her up a little bit more.
Yeah, but then they're kind of like having flights of fancy together, to the point where like the other half of their crew has no idea what's happening. And it's kind of an example of poor leadership on Ramsey's part. Like, what eventually happens for the crew to fragment is a little bit on Ramsey. Like, he's a very interesting character in that he makes obvious mistakes along the way. He never, he doesn't bring in Rathbone when he and Mercia really get going. And they're like, let's explore the magic of the Sea of Thieves, and let's explore like the hidden cultures here.
And he's leaving Shan out of the loop too, so it's not, when we see Rathbone being fed up with it, we're not thinking he's like, oh, he's just angry and whiny all the time. It's, no, nice, likable Shan is also kind of left in the dark here.
Although Shan comes back from it, Shan does not go to the dark side, but so it's not like Rathbone's in the right either. It's very deft handling of how a friend can go bad. Like, a friend of yours can go to the dark side. To bring up Star Wars, Cameron, this is the Obi-Wan Anakin relationship, Ramsey and Rathbone, that the prequels never gave us, because Anakin was always unlikable. And, like, I'm not counting, like, Clone Wars or anything.
Clone Wars, as much as I really like what it does for Anakin's character, can never really reconcile that the turn in Revenge of the Sith is so abrupt.
So abrupt and over the top, because the nice thing about Rathbone, he doesn't go from zero to child murder like in one night. Not just child murder, child genocide. He doesn't do that. It's a slow progression, and he makes the fateful choice to turn on Ramsey because the opportunity arises, right? Spoilers. So there is, well, let's talk about Shan, and then we'll talk about what happens to the crew. Okay. I'm getting ahead of myself because I want to talk about the night of the parlay, which is my favorite part of the book, I think.
It's a very rich part of the book.
Yes. Yeah, Mercia is my favorite character, and like, she's kind of the heart of the crew, right? Like, or no, I take that back. Ramsey is the heart of the crew. Mercia is the soul of the crew. Or maybe it's vice versa. I don't fucking know. But, she is my favorite character, and getting to the end here, it's established near the end that Ramsey finds her. Like, there's massive jumps forward in time with the Ramsey portion. Chapter 3, Ramsey's second chapter, jumps forward a year, and then it eventually jumps forward like close to another year. Like, the first good chunk, I think through chapter 15, takes place within around a 2-year time frame. And then it jumps 20 years after that.
Yeah, it's a weird thing where I don't feel like we have exact dates of when these chapters take place relative to the game itself, but we can kind of gauge when they happen relative to each other.
Well, we do know, and Cameron, you and I just replayed the first Tall Tale last night, before recording this episode, and the first Tall Tale actually establishes that the Magpie's Wing, Ramsey's ship, which gets pretty battered in chapter 15 but does not sink, it gets repaired eventually. The Magpie's Wing sinks on their 9th summer in the Sea of Thieves, so that would be roughly, I think, 7 years after the first 15 chapters.
Right.
So, they're like and Mike Chapman has actually discussed this, which I wasn't aware he went into this, but, he like said that the events of the book, Athena's Fortune, the Ramsey portions, are roughly 35 years in the past of the game. Or at least they start 35 years.
That's the thing. It's like, I saw like 30 years, but okay, which part was that 30 years.
Well, I think the guiding point we have here are DeMarco and Lassetti, because it's established that he has 2 young children at the very beginning. So, because they're in the game, and I would say they can't be any older than 40
I would agree.
in the game. So, you kind of have to say, okay, so it doesn't establish their age, so they could be like infant twins or toddlers at that point. So, yeah, I was trying to figure it out before I even read the thing that Mike Chapman said. And I came up with that. I was impressed that it like aligned so closely with what apparently is the internal canon. Because you have the 2-year time period, and then it jumps 20 years, for when Rathbone has founded the Gold Hoarders and he's living out of the Sea of Thieves. Rathbone, I'm going to bring up Lost again, because Rathbone reminds me of the character of Charles Widmore a little bit. Somebody who left the island. He was kind of in charge of the group on the island that the survivors of Oceanic Flight 815 refer to as the Others. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent here, but anyway, he leaves the island at one point and he lives off island and he forms this huge business empire, but he still has the express purpose of returning to the island and exploiting it. And so Rathbone to me is Charles Widmore. Anyway, there's the 20-year jump. So that's roughly 22 years. And then Rathbone becomes scalified, right? And then there is this indeterminate jump forward in time where Ramsay, and this is the first time it's really 100% established that Ramsay survives Rathbone's betrayal. There is this whole Ramsay chapter without Ramsay, and he's only briefly alluded to once, by Mercia. But, so I don't know how long,
I feel like it's kind of implied he got better after the betrayal, but they kind of kept it quiet.
Yeah, I mean, we do get a flashback to what exactly happened to him after he was presumed dead. But yeah, so I was like, then there's it's maybe like a 3 or 5 year jump or just a 1 year jump. We don't know, but it takes a while for Rathbone to fully become established as the Gold Hoarder, the quote unquote Gold Hoarder. And then there's a jump forward in time with Lorena's stuff, which takes place more closer to the time period right before the game starts. So yeah, it's confusing. It's confusing. And it all internally makes sense, but, and it makes sense, I eventually, really thought about it long and hard, and it came to the same numbers that they were coming to. But, yeah, if you accept that it takes place, there is, maybe a 10-year jump between, the end of Ramsay's chapters and then the beginning of Lorena's chapters, that it does make sense, and it would also line up with the comics, because Mike Chapman says that the comics take place 10 years in the past. And I reread the comics immediately after the novels just for clarity's sake, and the impression I got there was Lassetti and DeMarco did not know that their father had died yet, and he might have it recently happened, and he recently got set up in Athena's fortune. So yeah, anyway, that's a long path to say Mercia is my favorite character. But my point was that, her character passes away, I think of natural causes, and Ramsay finds her.
I think she's the only confirmed, dead and stays dead main character in the entire book.
Which was heartbreaking, because she was my favorite character. But, it was done in a very kind of matter-of-fact way that was kind of blunt, but it needed to be blunt, and it wasn't belabored. It wasn't it was and that was the day she died. And
it's I remember my reaction reading, and it was just kind of a very understated wait, what?
Yeah, I was because when she reappeared in chapter 17 and in the 20 years later, essentially the Wrathbone chapter, and she reappeared sailing on Eli's, is it Stone? Eli Stone?
Slate, I believe.
Slate, yeah. Something hard
he's very
and
relevant
rocky.
to the Tall Tale you don't like playing very much.
Yeah. Ironic that I might like that Tall Tale better now that I like his character more. But yeah, she joined his crew. I guess the crew of the Morning Star.
I mean, I think it's kind of like it. I don't even know if it's his crew necessarily. Like they just have a big alliance, kind of serving the Pirate Lord.
Yeah, but we know she didn't sail with Ramsay anymore, but she was still part of that alliance of pirates loyal to the Pirate Lord. So I don't know if she was her own captain at that point and she was just sailing with Slate, but and the Morning Star. But yeah, when she reappeared, I was like, yes. But yeah, then she died. But it's like it's a good death. It's like sad, but it makes you feel melancholy, but not in a depressed way. It's the best kind of death, and the only character that stays dead in the book. And then there's Shan, and Shan is recommended to Ramsay by Rowena or whatever, the owner of the tavern, Ramsay's childhood friend, who frequents the tavern, which becomes the tavern, the Unfired Pistol, which we see in the comic series. At the beginning of the comic series, that's where the crews kind of meet up at the beginning of that. And Ramsay, I think she worked in the tavern, and Ramsay buys the tavern for her. And then I guess at some point she retires or passes on, but it's known as the Pirate Lord's Tavern. And it becomes known as the Unfired Pistol because the pistol that Ramsay sends back to her, made out of the enchanted metal from the chains that chained Kraken by the merfolk. We're getting into the weeds here.
There's such a long chain to trace here.
It is a long chain. But basically, Shan comes recommended by Rowena, the tavern keeper, outside of the Sea of Thieves. And he is an older man. He is, I think, was he in his 50s?
I don't know
at this point?
Yeah, it's kind of guessed. He's definitely older than the rest of the characters. The narration assumes he's around 50, but he's like a very thin man. He's balding, and what little hair he has left is gray or white.
Yeah. But he is sort of the Q, the James Bond Q of the group, in that he's kind of but he's more mirthful too. He's kind of he's a tinkerer. He's an inventor. He's
kind of very like understatedly one of the most influential people to have been on the Sea of Thieves, because he is implied to be responsible for your ability to shoot yourself out of a cannon and not get killed.
Yeah, he is basically responsible for all of the logic and physics betraying items in the game, because he made them out of the cursed metal that the merfolk used to chain an ancient kraken down on Kraken's Fall Island, which was called Old Mother, by the way. But that's just like, there's deep lore in this that like ultimately like impacts nothing on the actual story, but it's like seeds planted, and you're like, oh, will that story be told later? The story of Old Mother. There's also this little thing dropped when they're talking about the history of the merfolk. Was it the Whispering Plague?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, I want to know what the Whispering Plague is. Now, granted, I've had my fill of plagues this year, but maybe once we get over the whole COVID thing, then I'll be in the mood for finding out about the Whispering Plague, or have it come back into the Sea of Thieves when we get into more merfolk lore in game. But Shan is awesome. I love this character, and I like that he could have been seduced by Rathbone and gone to his side, but ultimately he didn't join him, and he stayed loyal to Ramsay and Mercia. Like I said, like there's a lot of like little nuance that you don't really pick up on when you're reading it, but when you're reflecting back on it, you're like, oh yeah, you know, Shan was more aligned with Rathbone when they were having these big disagreements as a crew. When
they're always amicable about it.
Yeah, but like Rathbone didn't understand why they were pursuing like the lore of the Sea of Thieves, why they were like chasing legends and merfolk and trying to form alliances with pirates and have a code like where, you know, the Sea of Thieves is about some higher ideal than just looting and murdering each other. And this disagreement, this schism between the crew, Shan was feeling left out because Ramsay and Mercia were kind of giddy and like high off their own supply and not sharing with the rest of the crew. But ultimately he revealed himself to be an upright guy, an upstanding crew member. And yeah, he's still alive. I mean, it's never confirmed he's dead in the modern day. I assume he is, but at the end of Ramsay's portions, he was still alive at the very least.
I had to assume if he may be a ghost currently, but I kind of read Mercia's death as being from natural causes, and if Shan is probably the oldest of the group, we don't really get an indication of Mercia's age, but I have to assume he died.
Yeah. But, you know, the whole Ramsay portion and like really getting into Ramsay and Mercia's philosophy when it comes to what life on the Sea of Thieves means. And Ramsay goes into this whole like screed about like not being under the rule of kings and queens, and how like in the real world, quote unquote, like they slave people and treat people horribly, and Sea of Thieves means like freedom for everyone and everybody is an equal. And you kind of get the sense that like Ramsay finds a higher purpose out there, and Rathbone, who scoffed when he found out that Mercia was a woman, wants no part of it. And it's interesting to me because this is the problem when you do period pieces today is, how do you like reflect the true nature of how life was in the 1600s versus our more progressive ideals today? Like you want to have solid representation. You want to reflect like all lifestyles, all races and creeds. But, you know, if you're going to be authentic, that, yeah, some pretty terrible shit happened to people who didn't conform back in the day. So, like, I think Sea of Thieves as a conceit is kind of brilliant in that it allows you to have more higher-minded ideals in a time period they wouldn't exist by like having this like realm that people escape to where they get to be like openly gay or transgendered, or they get to be women equal with men, or they, you know, it's like it's kind of just cool to see Rare embrace that as part of the ethos of the Pirate Lord. And that really made me find his character endearing, especially when contrasted with Rathbone. So
yeah, agreed.
But they still are pirates, you know, like that's the cool thing about Sea of Thieves. Like, I'm not saying like Ramsay is entirely like altruistic or he's an upstanding guy. Like he basically abandoned his family, right? Like,
these are all flawed characters. They're pirates. Like every single object in Sea of Thieves, there's something not quite right.
Right. If social media existed in the Sea of Thieves, then there would be all sorts of Ramsay is over parties or Ramsay is canceled parties, you know, like, but I think those flaws that are inherent in everyone, I think that makes them more fleshed out and realized and authentic. And, you know, when Sea of Thieves first launched as a game, one of the big complaints from longtime Rare fans is all of the NPCs aren't interesting. They all feel hollow. This was the time when the only NPCs in the game were really the shopkeepers and the trading company representatives, you know. We've definitely gotten past that point where there are some damn interesting characters in both the lore and the ancillary media and also in game now. So, yeah. Anyway, let's move to the Unforgiven. If you're ready to move to the Unforgiven.
Yeah, let's go back to the future.
So
past,
jumping forward,
but the not so distant past.
Right, jumping forward 10 years into the future, but still before the events of the game, which of course take place hundreds of years before our present day. There's the crew of the Unforgiven, and this is the crew that Lorena joins early on in her adventures. I do want to talk about, and I see you wanted to talk about, that the figurehead of the Unforgiven was of a quote-unquote fearsome woman with 2 crossed pistols. And I think you think, that this figurehead is actually the Huntress figurehead that is the in-game homage to Joanna Dark from Perfect Dark, right?
I made a note of it, but I wasn't exactly certain of that, because now that we have a full Perfect Dark livery set, that might muddle things a little bit. Though I guess the original Huntress figurehead, which is more based on Perfect Dark Zero Joanna, could still be this figurehead, but it's a nice little... Right. I feel like maybe this was the implication, but there is an out. Sort of similar to when there's a passage about Eli Slate's ship later in the book, and by that I mean earlier in time, but later, and, you know...
What?
Well, that is described as having a bear figurehead. And at the time I first read this book, I thought, oh, well, maybe that's the bear and bird figurehead. Come Tall Tales, we learn it's actually its own visually distinct bear. So
yes,
it's one of those things that I think there is some wiggle room left in to go one way or the other, depending on how the greater lore of the game shakes out.
Which bear figurehead is best? Answer me! I'm going to say the original Bear and Bird figurehead, the one that you got for Banjo's 20th anniversary and or for getting the first 4 figures statue, comes with the code. Although they haven't shipped that yet. They're shipping I just got the notification that the Conquer statue shipped today, but I still don't know where the Bear and Bird figurehead is, or not figurehead, the Banjo-Kazooie statue. Jesus Christ, I've got too many things in my head. I've got too many terms and arcane bits of knowledge. Devil's Shroud, Devil's Roar, blah, blah, blah. Reaper's Mark, Reaper's Bones. The Reaper from Off a Grab by the Ghoulies, who is not a ghoulie created by Crackpot, but is in fact the actual Grim Reaper, but not to be confused with Greg the Grim Reaper from Conquer, who is more of a dog catcher.
Not to be confused with the Reaper's Bones, not to be confused with the Reaper's Sails.
Not to be confused with Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. Not to be confused with Godzilla by Blue Oyster Cult. Not to be confused... Okay. So... yeah, anyway, I took this to mean that it was the Huntress figurehead, and the original Huntress figurehead, before the Pirate Emporium moved in and offered the full ship set. So there's Lorena, and you wrote that she's an audience surrogate character, and I will agree, she's the audience surrogate character, which is why I was initially hesitant upon reaching her chapter. It's like, oh, an audience surrogate character. Come on. I don't need that.
Here's what makes that work for me, and I think it makes Lorena one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character in the book, is that she's an audience surrogate character, but she has a very clear personality all unto herself. Like, she could have very easily been the sort of Arthur Dent kind of character who just reacts to everything quizzically and waits for another character to explain what the hell is going on, which does happen. Yeah. But where Lorena is different is that I would say she's a character who is 3 steps behind, but wants to be and carries herself as somebody who is 3 steps ahead.
Yes. And this is why Chris Allcock is a better writer than me, because I would have written her as Arthur Dent. I would have written her as like purely reactive rather than she's really the one a lot of times that takes the initiative before her more experienced crew.
And it seems to bite her in the ass a little bit, because when she's a character who exudes so much confident energy that when she gets in over her head, it's kind of, well, people just assumed you knew.
Yeah. She's very much like anti-imperialism. She's very much like she wants to escape, like Navy. She wants to escape, like all of the companies, trading companies, like she doesn't like institutions. She's very much a free bird.
She's extremely skeptical of the trading companies, and I think even the name Pirate Lord. Like, just anything that conjures the image of a singular ruler. There's even, like, a passage where she kind of goes off about, like, her dislike of monarchies.
Yeah, she's her deal, I think, is established early on in that she always wants to explore the unknown. She wants to reach places nobody else has reached. She wants to see things that are off the map, off the charts. And so that's why she's attracted to the Sea of Thieves. And like, I think much to her disappointment initially, like she gets to the Sea of Thieves and she actually stows away on another ship. She hides in the barrels. And she gets there and then she finds, by this point in time, like closer to the time of the beginning of the game, she realizes how regimented things even are in the Sea of Thieves, and that there are trading companies, and basically she doesn't like the structure of the game itself. And it's like it's kind of amusing, like she, in some ways, and I know this wasn't the intention, but it kind of can be read like this after the fact. She represents early on gamers who weren't impressed with Sea of Thieves at launch, but grew to love it over time as they continued to add monthly updates and eventually tall tales. Because she, essentially, her story concludes in a tall tale, and then at that point she realizes, like, her place in the Sea of Thieves.
Yeah, and she's just a very fun character to read. I mean, I said that she can kind of be read as a character who's 3 steps behind, which makes it so much more satisfying when she just gets one over on people in the book.
Yeah.
Like the shopkeeper early on, or just toward the end where she kind of like engineers a way out of a very hopeless situation. She's a damn fun character to read.
Yeah, she's scrappy. She's a scrappy character, but you know, she's never portrayed as like she screws up a lot. She stumbles, she kind of has to bluff her way through it. So she's not like, a lot of times with these characters, especially audience like surrogate characters or just protagonists, they can be portrayed as completely inept or uber competent to the point where it strains, you know, credulity. I think they found the right, or Chris Allcock found the right balance with Lorena in that she screws up, and then she comes up with a really good plan, and it's kind of back and forth, very human and very much like the experience playing the game. So, yeah, she really did warm herself to me once I got past the jump forwards in time or the flashbacks to Ramsey, and I was like, I just want to stay with Ramsey. I was finding that interesting. But once Lorena, especially once she met her crew, and they really endeared themselves to me pretty damn quickly. So once like that whole group was established and set up, and it was just kind of fun then to see. It was sort of like watching a new player experience Sea of Thieves for the first time. And as somebody who's like been playing the game since before launch, it's kind of fun to see that reaction, even through the prism of a fictional character. But she is not the captain of the ship. That is the captain, Adelheid. Is that how you...
Adelheid, yeah.
Idlehyde. Okay, yeah. I guess is that a German name? I took it to be German. It sounds German or something like that. But she is the captain, and she is. Well, you wrote Kirk versus Lorena's Picard.
This is how Chris parsed this in an interview. The Kirk to Lorena's Picard. And Star Trek is a blind spot for me. But I can kind of see I'm guessing this is sort of like very like rash impulsive leadership versus like carefully plotting out.
Maybe. You could also say she's the Kirk to Lorena's Spock.
So
that would keep things in the same era. But
I'm sure like the chat might go off on me because I'm sure people might know Star Trek better than I do.
I just, talked about Star Wars for the first hour and a half of this podcast, so I'm not as much of a Trekkie as some people, but I would think if she was the Kirk, she would be Captain Girdlehide. Anyway, no, but she is experienced, and she's also a little bit fiery in that she gets the crew in trouble a lot. Like when we first meet her, we first meet the crew, which the three members of this crew are already established as a crew when they meet Lorena, but they couldn't fulfill something for the Order of Souls. They like screwed up, and the Order of Souls like doesn't want any business with them.
I'd say her, and now that I think about this, may have been like some notes that Chris shared like public. I can't remember where I got this Kirk and Picard comparison, but I think Adelheide's personality and character is best like typified by the way she enters the book, which is running from the Order of Souls on Sanctuary Outpost, hopping along rooftops to get away from them, reaching her ship, and then firing a cannonball through the dock to splinter it so they can't follow her.
Yeah, I'm all about a good parkour sequence, so I quite enjoyed that. So like she is, I get the sense that she's experienced and like she obviously knows the ins and outs of the Sea of Thieves, but she is kind of flailing a bit when we first meet her. Like the crew's on hard luck, and I think the idea is that Lorena is that missing component of the crew to make a solid, like, well-functioning crew, because the crew member they had before Lorena got eaten by a shark or something.
Yeah, eaten by a shark.
Now, which doesn't make sense, because by this point in time, the life and death cycle in the Sea of Thieves has kicked in, where people go to the Ferry of the Damned and then they come back. So why didn't their crew member just come back?
Yeah, I was curious about that too. I didn't know if it was like implicit that this happened outside the Sea of Thieves, or it just happened and they left their crewmate behind.
Or maybe their crewmate didn't want any part of it. Like the shark devouring was so traumatic that they were just like, you know what, I'm out. But yeah, this is why it surprised me that at the end of their story, it was established that the other three already knew all about the Ferry of the Damned and how this was already an entrenched part of life on the Sea of Thieves, because I didn't think that was gonna come into play yet. And well, if the comics take place like roughly 10 years before this, that makes sense, because I think the comics is where that first kicked in, shortly after Ramsay became the ghostly pirate lord and set up the infrastructure that we know it. That's when he made the deal with the ferryman and everything started. But like, that's, I think, when one of the crew members in the comic, I forget which one, the French woman, the blonde French woman, when she dies and she's resurrected, like that's the first time it happens, and everybody's like, what? But yeah, it's already an established part here. So why they didn't just get their crew member back, I don't know. We'll have to ask Chris about that, won't we? I'm not going to chalk that up as a continuity error. There's probably a whole novel just about that character. I mean,
it's kind of even just at play in this book itself, where there's multiple tiers of like undeath and rebirth in the Sea of Thieves itself. You
Yeah.
You can become a Skelly. You can just up and die and stay dead. You can come back as a ghost because there's no Ferry of the Damned, but people have still figured out ways to bring you back from the brink. There's just coming back from the Ferry of the Damned. There's what's not in the book, Revenants, which I don't think have been discussed in any detail whatsoever, but we know they're a thing.
Revenants, which we believe George, the mysterious stranger, and Gloria, the other mysterious stranger who's no longer in the game, they're both Revenants, which are like ghosts in human bodies, but maybe not their own, or something. I don't fucking know. Then there's also the dark matter constructs, which we don't even know.
And the Reaper's Bones, who even knows what's up with them intentionally.
Yeah, so it's a whole lot of nerdy, stupid lore, which I'm a fan of. So, anyway, so we'll have to ask Chris. Make a note somewhere, Cameron, that we need to ask Chris. Maybe we'll get him on the show for an interview soon. We'll have to grill him. And it's okay, because as has been established, Royston can survive a grilling, so can Chris Allcock. Why their crew member didn't just revive. And if he says it happened before then, it's like, what, 10 years ago? All right. Anyway. So anyway, yeah, Adelheid is, it takes a while to warm up to her as a character, I think. Like, I enjoyed her antics at first, but I think you're kind of tied to Lorena's perspective, and it takes her a while to warm up to her. And then once they do, then you're like, all right, I'm cool with Adelheid. Like, they're all right. And I really liked how much those two characters bonded. So much so that when there's the fake out near the end and you think, I never thought that Adelheid died permanently, because at that point it already alluded that the death and rebirth cycle was in play.
And through no fault of the book's own release date, we already saw this twist in the comics.
Yeah. But, spoilers. So, at the end, near the end of the Unforgiven crew's journey, they encounter Rathbone, aka the Gold Hoarder, in the present. They sail to Tribute Peak, and they go down the long winding road, underground to his inner sanctum.
Keep with the Lennon and McCartney references, don't you?
What's that?
Long and winding road.
Oh, sorry. Well, it's either the Beatles or Star Wars on this episode. I can't help myself. So yeah, they went down, which we do as our own pirates in the Tall Tales series, the first set of Tall Tales in the Shores of Gold chapter. We actually sail to Tribute Peak and see all of this for ourselves. But they go to his Scrooge McDuck like gold vaults, and they encounter the Gold Hoarder. They fight the Gold Hoarder, and Adelheid gets the Gold Hoarder's shovel through her heart.
I gotta say, this is something that I think is an advantage afforded to book media that it wouldn't be in the certain other Sea of Thieves tie-ins, because that is a really dark death, the way in which she dies.
Well, yeah, I wanted to bring this up because did you, like, at first in the early chapters of the book, did you notice that the level of violence was kept to a purely, like, slapstick level? No characters ever got shot or stabbed or died in any way. Like, it was all, like...
I think, like, some characters minor characters are established to be shot, but then it just says, oh, they got shot and fell overboard. Or
yeah, it's always kept vague, but there's a lot of like slapstick early on, and so much so that you could put, you know, the Benny Hill theme underneath it, and it would fit. But as the novel progresses, and I'm like, is that like, I was thinking in my head, I wonder if there's any like standards and practices, if there's any like editorial mandate, like, oh, like we don't want any like over the top violence in this book, or if that was just a decision made by Chris Allcock. But then as it went on, it got more violent, and the deaths got, like, the level of violence increased as the stakes increased, which I thought was actually the right way to take it. Like, when you have like Ramsey and his crew encounter the group of pirates who kidnap the merfolk and they try to liberate the merfolk, things get a little bit more violent there. And then in the night of the parlay, when Rathbone betrays Ramsey, that's when like the violence like really takes off. And then of course the most violent act in the book is the Gold Hoarder shoveling out Adelhide's heart, essentially. But it works, and it never wallows in any gore or anything. This is like it's like the grisly details are left to your imagination, but that's the great part about a book, right? Is it can seem a lot more impactful and violent because your imagination is doing the legwork. So, but yeah, Adelheid died, and I was like, she's gonna come back, and this is where the writer in me was coming out. I couldn't help myself. I was like, Adelheid will, like, there's gonna be a long period where we're made to think she's dead, but she'll probably appear around like the very end of the book, maybe the last page or two. Adelheid will pop back out, and sure enough, that's what happened. But yeah, at the time, like through Lorena's perspective, because you really get the sense that she has bonded with Adelheid in a deep and meaningful way, and for her to have to witness her murder and then realize like she's trapped in this essentially cave, this deep underground cave that's on fire too.
And Faisal and Ned, who are aware of that she can come back, are at this point like physically separated from her. Yeah,
they're MIA, and at the time Lorena's kind of processing their fate, and it's like they probably escaped, but in my head I was thinking, I bet they're dead too. They weren't, but yeah, it's a harrowing situation for Lorena to be in, and like I said, you don't know what Lorena's fate is going to be. Like, I didn't assume she was going to like succumb to any great harm, but she is like the character you don't know what's going to happen to because it's not preordained in the game. So that had some narrative thrills and chills at that point. But yeah. Faisal. Let's move on to Faisal and Little Ned. They are the other two crew members. So
I feel like we kind of have to talk about these guys in one group because they play very much as like a duo in my head.
They're Lenny and George from Of Mice and Men.
Yeah.
I mean, is that's my perspective, right? Am I wrong there, or is that like a pretty solid comparison?
But which one is the Kirk to the Picard?
I don't know. Faisal would be the Picard, absolutely. But Faisal, he has the body of Danny DeVito, but the voice of Kelsey Grammer.
I'm laughing because you said Danny DeVito, and he's described as shaped like an egg. In this
Can I interest you in an egg in these trying times? Yeah. I mean, once, like, I read that, and I was like, okay, he's Danny DeVito, and then I read his dialogue, and he's like, oh, he's Frasier. And then the character was sold to me. Like, there's nothing in the book that says he is like the character from Cheers and Frasier, Dr. Frasier Crane. And he is shaped like beloved American actor Danny DeVito. Nowhere in the book does it say that, because that would be pretty shit writing. But the fact that my brain just made that leap for the book meant that Faisal was probably the quickest, outside of Mercia, Faisal was the quickest character from introduction to me liking them. So it's like, okay, I can do Frasier-fi Danny DeVito, absolutely. He's an interesting character in that he is a pirate that probably shouldn't be a pirate. He's erudite. He talks his way out of situations more than he does fight. And then his partner, his companion, is Ned, who is nicknamed Little Ned because it's a Tiny Kong situation, you see, or a Tiny from off of Mario Golf Game Boy Color situation. He's big, he's lumbering, he's slow. not the brightest one in not the brightest shovel in the shed,
but he's one hell of a guy.
He's one hell of a guy. Yeah, I mean Ned is what he is. I think without Faisal, he'd be a much less interesting character, but their relationship, which is essentially Lenny and George from Of Mice and Men, like their relationship is what sells you on Ned, and the fact that he cares for Faisal and Faisal cares for him. And there's no scene where Faisal shoots him in the back of the head, so that's good. They're the ones who basically recruit Lorena, and Faisal takes a shine to Lorena before Adelheid, and you get the sense that like he's looking out for her a little bit. He's an alright dude. I like him. I like both of these characters. They're a good buddy duo.
And I made this call out in my notes when I was researching stuff for the book, but in an interview, Allcock was quoted as saying that Ned was his favorite character to write because he gets most of the deadpan lines.
Yeah. Yeah, he's matter of fact. He's I don't want to say he's stupid.
Well, he's entertainingly he's matter of fact in the face of, say, undead skeletons. Right.
Yeah. And he just rips their skulls right off. Yeah, I wish we could do that in the game, honestly. I get tired of slashing him with my cutlass. Sometimes it would be like the levels of violence against the skellies in the book are a lot more creative than is allowed or
there's a lot of like
game.
smashings in the book of skulls.
Yeah, smashing the skulls, breaking them, they'll rip off their arms, and they did that in the comics a little bit too, but it's like, oh man, like all we get to do is shoot them and slash them in the game. And
what we're saying is add punching to Sea of Thieves.
Yeah. Oh man, I would love those bunny hopping bastards when they jump on your ship, when those other crews get on your ship and they just bunny hop around. Pirates don't bunny hop, alright? That's not something that pirates do. Ramsay would frown on bunny hopping, but they're always legends. So they're always like, oh, look at me, Ramsay loves me, I'm a pirate legend. And they just bunny hop around like an idiot and they double gun you. And you know what? I would love to just punch them and punch them and punch them. It's like, I'm Ramsay's favorite. You're a bad pirate legend. You should join Rathbone. Because I bet Rathbone bunny hopped at some point in his life. Anyway, so there are other characters, and I don't want to get into, like, I feel like this is where spoilers would do a disservice to anybody who wants to get into the game and just decided to listen to this episode and might regret it. Like there are characters who appear later on in the game in one form or another, and to explain how they're portrayed here and the cognitive dissonance of seeing them here, and you're like, oh, whoa, but in the game, so I don't want to get into that, right? We're gonna leave some of those characters untouched.
One was really sad to me, like felt like a shovel through the heart, if you know what I mean.
That sounds like an 80s like power ballad, like a shovel through the heart. So we already mentioned Rowena, the tavern owner and Ramsay's friend. And a point we didn't bring up earlier is she introduced Ramsay to his wife. And Ramsay's wife we'll get into when we get into we're basically wrapping things up here, but I want to jump into kind of where the characters wind up at the end. More so than we've already discussed, where like the plots converge. But Ramsay's wife is an important part of the story, even though we never see her. She's never like a present influence, but she influences things in ways that aren't revealed until the very end, I guess. But yeah, Rowena, it's kind of implied that there might have been a possible romance, like not like anything that they actively pursued, but like Ramsay's kind of wistful, like maybe at one point they could have had a romance. Maybe that's just me reading into things.
I just took it as like a platonic like friendship.
Yeah, it is platonic, but I don't know if like they like I think at one point Ramsey's like it's almost implied that like he's wondering why nothing ever happened between them. I don't know. Maybe that's just me reading between the lines and filling in the blanks.
I mean, she introduced him to his current wife.
Right. Yeah. But anyway, but yeah, Ramsey like it's implied that, you know, there are marital why can't I say that word? Marital troubles between Ramsey and his wife because of his exploration of the Sea of Thieves and then ultimately duties in the Sea of Thieves as the pirate lord.
Yeah, that'll do it.
But they say till death do us part, but they never talk about the point where you come back as a ghost. So, Rowena is like his only point of contact in the main world, not the mainland, but like the outside world, the Earth realm, whatever you want to call it. He actually writes to her at one point, which I was like, wait, how does mail service work in the Sea of Thieves? I guess it would make sense that there would be mail ships eventually, like, going through the Devil's Shroud, because at this point, like, the Devil's Shroud is well traveled. So, I just hadn't considered like there would be that level of communication to the outside world. But yeah, he writes her a letter, and basically this is right before the parlay, I think. And then just like, I'm going to send you this gun, this souvenir. And then of course, anybody who read the comics will find out that that's, in a set of guns, and he gives one of those guns to his children, and he gives the other one to Rowena. So, anyway, and then the other character that I want to discuss and that you want to discuss is Stitcher Jim. And so I read the book, right, when it first came out, and I forgot a lot of the names and details. And I don't know why, like, Stitcher Jim didn't, like, jump out to me when I first read it, because at that point he was established in the game. So I was just like, it didn't mean as much, but of course Stitcher Jim didn't mean as much back then as he does now in the game. Stitcher Jim has been a major character in the game, and he is a shitty little weasel. Yeah. Stitcher Jim is essentially, if we're going to compare these, we compared Rathbone to Gollum.
He's sailed under so many different flags, and he's been a little shit weasel under every single one of them.
Yes, if Rathbone is Gollum in some respects, or Smeagol, because Smeagol became Gollum as Rathbone became the Gold Hoarder, then Stitcher Jim is Wormtongue. I think he's a sniveling toady who sucks up to the figure who he thinks will provide him the most power. He's like a pilot fish, right? He'll follow like whatever warlord is like in vogue at the time, and he'll try to play both sides at the same time. Stitcher Jim was a major part of the story when they introduced the Devil's Roar in the game, the volcanic region in the Sea of Thieves. And, that was Forsaken Shores. That was the story event that introduced it. Forsaken Shores that introduced the Devil's Roar. To keep all these terms straight. I don't know how Jeff does it over on Golden Sands blog post. But then he also came back then in the lore after that. He joined the Bildrats, which are the pseudo trading company that Duke is a part of, that they're more about like the spirit of adventure and completing like nonsense tasks and commendations, and like, are you like hard enough to complete this task, or are you crazy enough to do this, or hey, do this 5 times. I don't know. But that's what the Bildrats do, and Stitcher Jim joined them, but he was actually working for another figure. It's a whole thing. And Stitcher Jim appears here. And when Stitcher Jim first appeared, it was implied in the game. It was implied he was allied with the Gold Hoarder.
He has
right?
a tattoo on his arm with the Gold Hoarder's sigil on it, and he kind of like I think he was like kind of deliberately hiding his hand behind his back when we first met him in game to like underscore that until you figured out kind of what a sleazebag he was.
Yeah, but the thing is, you can always walk around and look behind characters if they're not behind a desk. So, whoops. So anyway, Stitcher Jim, he is basically this, I keep saying shitbag on this episode. I keep saying shitweasel.
I mean, that is his personality.
He is some mound or animalistic representation of big old poops. And he is the first one, he and his gang, I don't even want to say crew, his gang, they hang out in the port town on the islands that's where Rowanna's Tavern is located.
It's funny that we talked about wanting to talk about him being in this book. He's, all things considered, in this book for a very small portion of it, but he screws things up so badly with the ripple effect of what he's doing. Yeah,
he is, why, I mean, if it wasn't for him, we might not be in the game today, right? But also, fuck him and everything he stands for. So he is, like, Rathbone is basically, like, sells him a map to the Sea of Thieves, right? And so he and his gang, they're the first to get there, but then they let other people know for money, and they basically sell all these maps to all these pirates.
And the price of this map was essentially Jim's loyalty to Rathbone.
Right, yeah, it's so and then when later on, like we don't find out but later on, the base that Ramsey and Mercia and Shan and Rathbone set up in the Sea of Thieves, which they named Thieves Haven, which is one of the prominent islands in the game, it gets ransacked and all their possessions get stolen by a crew that we don't see because it happens when they're away. But we later find out it's Stitcher Jim, and it was Rathbone who tipped them off to put the thumb in the eye of Ramsey, because at this point, like, Rathbone was like, we're fucking pirates, why are we, like, building bases and talking all this nonsense about legends and magic, and this is not what I came here to do. I came here to get rich, because he's a greedy asshole, and Stitcher Jim is a useful idiot who has no moral compass whatsoever. And so then later on, Stitcher Jim is hanging out in the tavern when Ramsey has a parlay with a bunch of other pirates, among them Eli Slate and some other figures, which we won't get into here. I'm
biting my tongue super hard not to talk about one of them.
Yeah. Not Captain Blackeye, by the way. If you at home are like, does Captain Blackeye appear in Athena's Fortune? Let me get out in front of you right now and say, no, Captain Blackeye does not appear in Athena's Fortune. Captain Blackeye did appear sort of in the Tales from the Sea of Thieves journal. So if you want to get some Captain Blackeye, that's where you gotta go. Captain Blackeye does not appear in this, but he's not needed in this either. So it's not ultimately a big deal. I just don't want the DK Vine crowd to go into this novel expecting, Captain Blackeye is sure to show up.
I wouldn't want that to be your experience anyway. Like, you should be able to read this book without the expectation of, okay, is Blackeye going to show up on every page? Is Blackeye going to show up? No, it's... Yeah. And it's fine.
Right.
Book doesn't need Blackeye.
When are they going to get to the Blackeye factory? And I should also point out that the pirate captains who appear in this chapter are not K. Rool or Captain Blubber. So
Sea of Thieves original characters, I'll say that.
But
they're not
Ramsey
us
has
either. It's not.
No, we don't appear. No, God, no. That would be
we
gross.
built this up so much, and then we have to tear it down.
No, this only means something if you've played the game, okay? But these are important characters in the game. And it wouldn't make sense if it was us. Thank God it's not us, because this takes place long before our pirates came to the Sea of Thieves. Continuity would be shattered if any of the player avatars appeared in this. Anyway, so Ramsey has a parlay, which, if you know pirate lingo,
or have seen Pirates of the Caribbean.
Well, but if you know pirate lingo, a parlay is basically a truce where pirates of different crews meet, and they're not allowed hostilities between one another, and they discuss like business or whatever. Like a parlay is a big event, and especially at the time of this chapter 15, that's when everything goes to shit. The parlay is basically like the first of its kind in the Sea of Thieves, right? And Ramsey, this is where he makes the pitch that, hey, there has to be a better way. We can't keep looting and plundering and pillaging and murdering each other while we're here in this magical...
What was the point of making this a paradise for ourselves if we're actively preventing that from happening?
Right, like this was supposed to be not just the island, but this was supposed to be a thieves' haven. But more than that, it was supposed to be a place where they could be free. And ever since like Jim and his crew and all the other subsequent crews of pirates came in, it's just been more of the same, stealing from each other rather than discovering the untold wonders of the Sea of Thieves. And so Ramsey makes this pitch that, hey, let's have an alliance. And oh yeah, by the way, fuckers, guess what? I found me all sorts of cursed metal, and I have made all of these treasure chests filled with gold. And oh yeah, Shan has made the keys to them out of the same metal, and only we have the keys. So if you want any of this gold, you'll basically do as I say, and basically live life on a Sea of Thieves under the Pirate Lord's rule, which is this but not as this tyrant of a ruler, as this magnanimous, benevolent ruler who wants everyone to essentially get along and work together. And it's close to the vision of the game that we play, but it's a little bit more altruistic. It's a little bit more pie in the sky. And Stitcher Jim is in the background heckling them at this time. And this is where
it's funny because this is very realistically what trying to ally with other crews in the game is like.
It is. And I will say Slate seems to be the most interested in what they're saying. But
interested but skeptical.
Obviously skeptical, because this puts Ramsey in a position of power above all others. And Jim is there heckling. Well, it's not revealed that Jim is there yet, but it's alluded to because Mercia notices familiar shapes, and at this point the only familiar shapes, really, thinking back to the last time they were all in a tavern, it's going to be Stitcher Jim. But at this point, a kraken, the child of Old Mother, who has followed them back from Kraken's Fall, has basically pursued the scent of the magpie's wing. That kraken shows up, and this is the first time everybody's seen a kraken. It's implied they only know the legends, but this is the first time a kraken appears in the Sea of Thieves, and all shit breaks out. Shit. So
that's how you point, also know Stitcher Jim is there.
Yeah. So at this point, everybody, they're we gotta stop the kraken, and you're okay, maybe this is how Ramsey becomes the pirate lord. He successfully slays the kraken, and everybody's Ramsey is the best pirate of them all. We must do as he says. Nope. Basically the magpie's wing fights the kraken. The Morning Star, or the first iteration of the Morning Star, sinks here. The other crews fight a little bit. Mercia, I think Mercia and Shan get separated at this point, because they're riding with the other crews. I forget where Shan is.
Yeah, I know where Mercia ends up on another ship. But basically they have to be divided so that Ramsey and Rathbun can have a moment alone.
Yeah. So, the Kraken's tentacle hits the side of the ship, breaks the whole side of the ship clean off, and crushes Ramsey's leg, which, if you've ever looked at his character model, you'll know he has a peg leg. This is how he loses his leg. And
I'll also say a really cool part about this passage, which I won't go into the specifics, but it explains why in the game itself you only ever see the Kraken as a mass of tentacles, even though it's more than that in the book. And I really love the explanation why.
Yeah, there's a little bit, there's quite a lot actually in this novel, although it never feels like it. There's a lot that explains the in-game conceits of Sea of Thieves. Like, well, we can't like have the whole Kraken spawn in, but we'll just have its tentacles. Obviously, you know, that makes sense from a game design perspective, and like, you know, yeah, just show the tentacles and we'll just make the whole ocean inky black around it. But Chris Allcock always like weaves that stuff in this novel as like, oh yeah, this is why this conceit in the game is actually a thing. But it never feels like I have a list of things I want to professionally fan wank away. It's all very naturalistic and a vital part of the story ultimately. So it's very deftly done. Again, much more gracefully than I would have accomplished, because I would have been talking about holograms by chapter 2, I'm sure. But, yeah, Ramsey loses his leg, and then he's like, sliding off the ship, and Rathbone grabs him, and then, like, you don't really know if this wasn't really premeditated by Rathbone, but he realizes, oh, wait a second. I have been slowly and more intensely disagreeing and even loathing this man, this partner of mine, over the last 2 years. And now I could just drop him and watch him die and chalk it all up to the Kraken attack. Nobody would see what happens. I'm gonna do it. And then he drops, he steals his fucking wedding ring, puts it on because he's
just petty asshole. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Rathbone watches as Ramsey hits his head on the side of the ship. He's already got like a deadened leg at this point, but he hits his head on the side of the ship, basically like cracks his skull open and falls into the ocean. And it's implied that you think this is how Ramsey dies, right?
Unless you remember the knives in his back. The ocean didn't stab him 3 times.
I mean, he could have landed on them. They could have been like knives like that had fallen into the sea long ago, and it's just an unfortunate accident. But
they had nothing to do with the death. They were just aesthetic.
Yeah. No, this is where the merfolk that they befriended earlier, and we didn't really touch upon the merfolk stuff, and I deliberately didn't want to get too much into that because that is like where I really, really, really got invested in.
It's a really fascinating part of the book that goes unexplored in the game itself.
It's unexplored up until this point, and I think a lot of us are like eagerly anticipating the merfolk culture and lore to be a more active part of the game. And there's been a couple of red herrings, or I guess red merfolk in this case, where ruby splashtails. There's been a couple of ruby splashtails where they've set up like, oh, is this gonna like lead to like mermaid and merfolk stuff? And it doesn't. It's always like a fake out. And so, but if you know Sea of Thieves, you know that right now the merfolk are in the game. They're what returns you to your ship if you've fallen overboard or if it leaves you behind. You find the mermaid or merfolk in the water and they teleport you back. And this novel explains why there is an alliance between the merfolk and Ramsey's crew, and ultimately all the human pirates in the Sea of Thieves. And so they do the merfolk a solid. They renew the alliance between merfolk and humans, and they rescue Ramsey from, you know, what would have been his watery grave, and they take his body back to Sanctuary Outpost, where he's nursed back to health in secret because at this point, Mercia and Shan both suspect that Rathbone was actually responsible for the attempted murder. This is where the crew splits apart, but this is where Ramsey, after his recuperation, he and Eli basically make good on the parlay, along with, I think, another person who is surprising. And they basically form what becomes the Union that's more or less intact when we play the game. Although, you know, there's not like an alliance of pirates who sail under the Pirate Lord, but the notion of the Pirate Lord and all who came after him is established here. So basically, we don't find this out, though, until after we jump 20 years ahead and see Rathbone leave the Sea of Thieves and become, like, form the Gold Hoarders and become a rich businessman.
There's a good segment that's just dedicated to Rathbone living large with the lies he told and the spoils he took back home.
And there's a great line where it says, like, if you have enough money, any crimes go away, which is very apropos to the modern day, too, apparently. Anyway, basically, Rathbone comes back to the Sea of Thieves, because there is word of an island that has, been let go from the Devil's Shroud and is now part of the Wilds, which we know as Tribute Peak, aka the Shores of Gold, which in the current time of in-game time, it is in the Devil's Shroud, but you can reach it if you have the Shroudbreaker device. But in the novel, at this point, the Shroud does recede, as it sometimes does, and it ebbs and flows. Like there's a passage early on where they say Smuggler's Bay, or it's implied to be Smuggler's Bay, was actually taken by the Shroud, and they couldn't get to it for a while because it was surrounded by the Devil's Shroud, which, if you know the map of the Sea of Thieves, it is next to the Devil's Shroud, but it is currently accessible in game. Anyway, Tribute Peak has been released from the Shroud. It is part of the Wilds, and there's like all this like legend and hearsay of a vast treasure hoard, and Rathbone hears about it, and at this point he's like full on opulent greed. He wants it all for himself, and so he decides to sail back to the Sea of Thieves by himself to claim the entire treasure hoard. And he goes down in there and he finds it, and he sits in the throne. And he's like, there is no way for me to get this all back. I'm going to have to take it in shifts. And so he loads up his tiny vessel with like as much gold as possible. He's like wearing crowns and jewels. He's trying to keep as much with him as possible. And his ship is like low in the water.
He's
and
like over encumbered.
Sailing
like his arm is like partially like goldified from part of it being cursed.
So yeah, he sits in the throne, and it turns out the throne is cursed. It's got a curse on it, which is the skeleton curse. So this is how he becomes a skelly, right? Or is it the curse makes him a man of gold?
I think the way I interpreted it was that one of the treasures he loaded up onto his boat was cursed with the curse that causes you to become afflicted with gold, and the skeletonified effect is like a mixture of, I think it's deliberately kept vague, but toward the end of the passage where I'm skipping ahead a bit, but when Rathbone is kind of caught and gets in a situation where he's sinking to the bottom of the ocean, it's kind of saying like he's not even thinking about his death. He's just kind of consumed by his thoughts of gold. And not even thinking about like about the fact that he should be dying. And I think that is kind of the implicit turn. Like pure greed is amplified by like the mystic elements of the Sea of Thieves to churn him into a monster.
Yeah, so like the undeadification of him is a result of the curse, but the curse doesn't necessarily make him a skelly. He could have gone on to remain alive. It's sort of like that movie Death Becomes Her, where like Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn just become
whether or not it's
monsters.
Literally what turned him into a skeleton, figuratively it is.
Yes, and we'll have to ask Chris like what the actual intent behind the curse was. If he would have become a skeleton if he hadn't dived underwater and tried to pick up all the gold coins that spilled overboard from his ship to the,
it's just such
the point where he drowned.
Picture.
I know, he essentially drowned himself and had his flesh rotted off while he was trying to pick up all these gold coins. I mean, like, what the hell? It's pretty fucking dark, actually. Because I knew he became a skelly, like, just how fucked up the situation was that made him a skelly was lost on me when I read it. But now reflecting back on it, I'm like, oh, God.
That's also another aspect of this book, I think, and, like, all Sea of Thieves ancillary media, like, the Tales book, it gets into this, too. Like, we've seen a little bit in game of, like, the process of somebody becoming a skelly with Wanda, where it happened, like, we just saw her arm and then her, like, part of her face start to, like, rot a little bit, but...
Yeah.
Like, the, like, print media and, like, the written word and just, like, in-game text, that can all, like, go over the process of it happening little by little, and is always fucking horrifying in a way I don't think it would be if you actually showed it.
Yeah, there's a level of body horror when you have to internalize it in your head rather than it being portrayed for you. That definitely is unsettling, and it always makes me feel hungry. Like I should eat something.
Like the one I think about is, and like spoilers for Shores of Gold, but there's a journal entry from Briggsy saying like, oh, I feel great, and that's the problem because I haven't eaten in like weeks. I think it. Yeah. Now, the way I understood what happened was he was lured back to the Sea of Thieves with Tales of Tribute Peak, which was a sting by Ramsey's organization, essentially.
It was a setup by the Pirate Lord's fleet, essentially, because they were trying to lure Rathbone back because they knew, like, this treasure hoard remained undisturbed because it was being protected by the fleet, because they knew it was bait to get Rathbone back to the Sea of Thieves so they could confront him for his crimes. And this is where Slate and Mercia reappear. Rathbone does not reappear at this point. Mercia basically says, like, something to the effect of, you are under arrest under the authority of the Pirate Lord. She doesn't actually say that.
There's like a very satisfying string, like throughout, like from this point onward through the book, of just characters calling Rathbone on his shit.
Yeah. So this is the point though where Rathbone becomes a Skellyman, and then we jump forward a few years where we discover that Ramsey is alive. He's been the Pirate Lord for 20 years. But he has essentially, like, his responsibilities have, like, basically sucked all the joy out of being a pirate. And there's like a really, I think, sad part where he talks about, like, looking to his, like, left and right, expecting to see Mercia and Sean, and, like, they're doing their own thing these days, and he's got a crew, but they're basically a crew of, like, people that view him as the Pirate Lord and not just Ramsey. And he feels alone, and, like, the whole point of being a pirate for him is sharing the journey with his friends, and he only has subordinates at this point. And so he decides he like, it's time for him to retire and basically set up his retirement plan, which is what we see in game as, like, I don't think it was his plan to die, but to basically set up a tavern for legendary pirates in the Sea of Thieves, and maybe bring other people to the Sea of Thieves who he thought had potential, to follow in his footsteps. But yeah, it reminded me a little bit of like Ron Swanson in the last season of Parks and Recreation, where when we find out why he left the Parks Department, it's because everybody else did, and he missed his friends, and it was heartbreaking a little bit, but he decides before he retires he has to do one last thing, and that's have a spiteful monologue face to face with the Gold Hoarder.
This monologue is, I think, hands down my favorite part of the entire book, because it is just so satisfying after the last chapters of just watching Rathbone's dynamic evolve.
It's satisfying because...
Satisfying in a sad way, too, but just...
Yes, it's satisfying because, surprisingly, there is no exchange of violence in this entire chapter. Like, you're like, oh my god, Ramsay is gonna confront Rathbone. Ramsay's gonna die. Like, you're steeling yourself for, like, this epic confrontation where Ramsay is slain by the Gold Hoarder. Because we know, the Gold Hoarder, like, makes it, to the game itself, in his skelefied form.
And we know at this point that Ramsay is a vulnerable old man.
Yeah, because at this point, several decades have gone by.
He's alone, he's walking with a cane.
Yeah, he's hobbling in there, he's got a peg leg, a cane, he's not as spry as he used to be. Not that this character was ever that spry, but he goes down in there and he just, like, lets Rathbone or the Gold Hoarder have it with just this very, like, not, like, deservedly hurtful speech about, like, how miserable and empty Rathbone must feel, and how, like, everything that gives Ramsay's life meaning, Rathbone can never attain, because all he knows is, gold hoarding. And then he leaves, and then he just walks out, and, like, it gets through to Rathbone because he screams in, like, pain.
It's basically delivering the message, I pity you, and it cuts him so badly.
Yeah. And, it was very satisfying. Now, however, the two timelines intersect because what the crew of the Unforgiven are trying to do in the present, or the present of the book, they're trying to get to Tribute Peak to get the legendary hoard, which at this point, of course, is being guarded by the Gold Hoarder. So, they get there and shenanigans happen. It's basically essentially what happens in the Tall Tale, Shores of Gold, but, with some minor variations, because this happens before that. And this is where Adelheid, gets her heart shoveled out. And this is where, like, Faisal and Ned go missing, and the whole room collapses in on itself and catches the wood scaffolding catches on fire in a ring of fire that starts melting the gold. And Lorena is basically trapped in there with the Gold Hoarder, and she eventually escapes to the drawbridge, outside. And, shenanigans with the drawbridge. I mean, if you've ever seen Temple of Doom, you sort of know what's going to happen when there's a wooden rope bridge. It's not a drawbridge, there's a wooden rope bridge. Rathbone goes swinging on it, starts climbing up the other side. She cuts it, he falls into the ravine. Presumably, like, if you just finish the novel, you're like, oh, that finished him off. Didn't kill him. He made his way out of that situation, but he's left inconvenienced. So they don't get the treasure, but that's when Lorena is able to commandeer the ship left behind by a crew that got there first, of rival pirates who they killed. I don't know where these rival pirates went to, because they, like, finished them off, but it's established. This is where we first learned that the cycle of life and death and rebirth was in effect at this point, because we linger with one of the bodies of the pirates they slay, and it like evaporates in a green cloud. And so they should have come back. So I don't know where they were, if they were like still on the ferry, if the ferryman was keeping them, because it's established here that the ferryman might keep you on the ferry. If he feels like you've been naughty, he'll send you back when he feels the time is right, which of course in game is always on a set timer. But, I think from a lore perspective, it's implied here that it's very much up to him. So I don't know. Maybe he was just keeping them on the ferry for a while.
That is kind of a break from. It's one of the very few like conceits of a break from how things function in the game versus how things function in the fiction, which is the game will let you off the ferry within seconds because it has to treat everybody equally.
Yeah, in the game, it's just kind of like a timeout, a very minor penalty for dying. It's like, oh, you died, and now you're away from your ship while bad things are happening to it, or bad things are happening to your crew. But now you can come
Meanwhile,
back. But
the lore of the game establishes, well, you can piss the ferryman off badly enough that he just doesn't want to let you come back.
Yeah. So she sails to the nearest island, and I forget which island it's supposed to be, but that's where she finds the Unforgivens there, because she thinks Ned and Faisal have sailed away, and she sees them, and her theory is proven correct, and they reconvene, and then that's when Faisal and Ned explain the Fairy of the Dam to her, and that don't worry, they're sure Idlehyde will be back, and everything's going to work out. And I felt like this was kind of like almost. This is one part of the novel that I felt like I wish would have been explored a little bit more, because I felt like it sucked a little bit of the wind out of the narrative, because it's like, oh yeah, don't worry, death has no meaning. And of course you have to set that up for the game. That's an established fact of the lore. But I wish they would have like played with it more. But if, Chris Allcock was working on a timeline here, and if, the death and rebirth cycle was in effect in the comics, which take place, 10 years or so before this, then not much you can do with that. But I did like the discussion they had about it, though, because it's portrayed here as very much like they're not quite sure. Like it's more like a dream. When you come back, you sort of remember.
Like they try to get Idlehyde to describe it to them, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, but it's like Faisal even says like they're not quite sure if it's real. It's more like this dream or this memory that you sort of come back with, but it's intangible, which I really like, because I don't think that death should be treated as nonchalantly as it is in Sea of Thieves, which it has to be, but I do like that they go out of their way to...
It probably shouldn't be treated in media the way we do in game, where it's to the point of, well, we're low on bananas, I'll just climb up on the crow's nest and kill myself, because it's easier than eating to recover my health.
I was thinking about that when I finished this passage. I was like, this is going to change the way I play the game, because my pirate should not be treating it as just like a stubbed toe. My pirate should be treating it with some weight, because they're not quite sure if this is actually a real thing. And of course, at this point we've come back with like torches from like different colored flames. And so our pirates must have a pretty damn good idea that it definitely exists. We've talked to the ferryman
and ran errands for him.
Yeah, we found his corpse. Like we've done all sorts of things in the game at this point, but maybe early on it shouldn't have been treated like, I'll just kill myself, whatever. Anyway, so they go back to Sanctuary Outpost, and they go to the tavern, and they tell their tale to everybody in the tavern, and everybody's transfixed. And then Faisal and Ned pass out from grog drunkenness. And then this is where Lorena notices that there is now a hole in the tavern, a stairway that descends down. And this is the same stairway that's opened up by Pirate Legends in the game. If you play the Song of Legends on your instrument, this will open up the Legends Tavern, the portal to the Legends Tavern, and you go down under the tavern. And she did as well, and she's thinking this is just a wine cellar. I must be crazy. And she steps through the shimmering light, and she finds the tavern that Ramsay established, which is called, actually named after his ship, the ship he had after the Magpie's Wing, the ship he had when he approached Rathbone in his final chapter, which we find is called Athena's Fortune. And Athena's Fortune, we kind of left this point out. This is the treasure that the crew of the Unforgiven was hunting the entire book.
The misconception
the treasure
has
they
spread
thought,
that Athena's fortune is a literal fortune and not physical place.
And when you first start Sea of Thieves, like the in-game intro, title screen intro, it's
Athena's fortune calls to thee,
what,
yeah.
Right, so you think like, and of course Athena was the code name for Sea of Thieves too, so, but you think, like, they think that Athena's fortune is going to be at Tribute Peak because of a Skelly that they stole the memories of via the Order of Souls, pointed them to there, and they thought this is where Athena's fortune is, and they thought that's what the Gold Hoarder's hoard, his banana hoard, essentially was.
Oh,
but
I'm
it turns
just remembering a very, very good moment from the fight with the Gold Hoarder from Lorena's perspective. When she tries to sort of, as she has early in the book, like smooth talk her way out of a situation. She tries to like get the Gold Hoarder to calm down by saying, "Oh, we didn't know this was yours. We thought this was Athena's fortune, the treasure of the Pirate Lord." And he's just livid.
She just pissed him off even more, and it's where her tongue couldn't get her out of the situation, and she had no idea why. But Athena's Fortune was the name of the ship, and it's now what Ramsay has built this tavern for pirate legends out of, where true pirate legends deemed worthy by him can meet and share stories, which to him is that camaraderie is what this is all about. It's why he retired in the first place. And so he and Lorena finally meet at the end of the book, like the two eras finally converge. And this was a beautiful moment. And this is where like Ramsay talks about what happened to the crew, what happened, why he decided to, like hang up his, not hat, but I guess his cutlass. And like, we find out like how he even came back as a ghost. Like his death is never brought up, but how he came back as a ghost is the Reaper's Mark necklace that he wears was discovered by Mercia. And it's implied that by him wearing this, it allowed his ghost to come back, and maybe he's then able to bring other ghosts back from before the era of the life and death and rebirth cycle. Anyway, so they have a nice chat, and Lorena's like, "Hey, this is great that you think I'm a legend." Oh, she gives him his wedding ring back, by the way, which was a really nice moment, because she stole it from Rathbone as he fell down the ravine, down the crevice.
After chopping off his hand.
After chopping off, as you do. And then so Ramsay's basically given Lorena like essentially a cheat code and made her a pirate legend right out of the gate after her first voyage. And Lorena's like, whoa, hold on. I don't use the game genie. I want to do this right. I want to actually earn my place as a pirate legend. So I'm going to leave now, but I'll be back. I'll be back when I'm level 50 in 3 trading companies. She doesn't say that, but that's the only way it can happen. And then as she goes to leave, they have a discussion about Athena and what Athena is. And, because she finds out the ring was Ramsay's wedding ring, and Ramsay makes a reference to having fallen in love, and that was like a mistake he made and like kept him from being like the best pirate he could be. But it said more affectionately like that. Like it's really like seems harsh towards his wife, But then
I kind of read it as like shameful that he couldn't decide and kind of hurt both worlds for doing that.
yeah. Yeah, I guess that's the better
And
way to read it. But
he distances when he's explaining this. He kind of says like, "Oh, I knew somebody who did this." You know, not.
Yeah.
And Lorena reads between the lines that it's him.
right. And then as she goes to leave, the last thing she asks him is what was her name, and he says Athena. So Athena is Ramsay's wife, and Athena's fortune, ergo, is that he took care of her and his family by his pirating ways. He made sure they were at least taken care of. So it was kind of like I actually like teared up at that point because I was like, oh wow, like it's a very like melancholy like way to end it, because up until that point, like in game, we don't know what Athena is in reference to. It's a weird kind of
It's a Greek name, like, kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah, so it's like, what is Athena? And the revelation that Athena is Ramsay's suffering wife, and that in a sense he was trying to like have the best of both worlds and make it right for her by providing like like Athena's fortune is I'm taking like the gold he got in those years after his initial chapters, when he becomes the pirate lord and sails on Athena's fortune. It's all done like to, I guess, like salve his guilt, to like try to like make it right. And we know like he does take care of those he cares about, Rowena, and in the comics we do like learn a little bit more about DeMarco and Lassetti, and although, you know, he makes them come to the Sea of Thieves for their quote unquote inheritance. But yeah, I was just like, whoa, that's like weirdly sad. And I felt feelings. And you don't expect to feel feelings when you read a piece of tie-in media literature. But I did. I felt things. Chris Allcock made me feel emotions like a damn Pixar movie. And usually I don't like that, Cameron. Usually I'm like that. I feel manipulated. I feel like Pixar, you were just trying to make me cry in the theater. And you know what? Fuck you. I'm not going to fall for it again. With this, though, it felt like a good kind of cry, like a end of Lost cry. And I really liked it. So, so I did want to get into like some continuity questions I had and some other aspects, but you know, I feel like that would be better served when we can get Chris Allcock on the podcast and we can just ask him ourselves.
Yeah, well, we're just going to talk about what a good job he did on this episode. When we have him on, we're going to let him have it.
Oh, it's going to be like when Rathbone dropped Ramsay across the side of the Magpie's wing and watched his head crack into the abyss. That's exactly what it's. So please, Chris, I want to get you on for an interview. Final thoughts. All right. If you're a Rare fan, but haven't gotten into Sea of Thieves yet, but want to now that the game is on Steam, I absolutely say read the novel first, because it will make you appreciate Ramsay more, the Pirate Lord. It will make you appreciate the ethos of what Ramsay wants you to set out to do. It'll make you appreciate what the game is theoretically all about. Not to those bunny hopping bastards who I want to punch the life out of who play the game, but to those who play the game with a sense of whimsy and romanticism, and like who get something more out of the game than PvP nonsense, which is, you know, a fine way to play the game. If you want to play it as a Reaper's Bones, that's great. But if you want to play it as the Pirate Lord intended, definitely read this book. Damn, Cameron, I like this book. I love this book. Like, I went on and on about Star Wars for 90 minutes at the beginning of this podcast, but you know, what Shadows of the Empire like meant to me as a 13-year-old or whatever back in the day, this means to me even more as an adult, because like this is finally the piece of tie-in literature to my biggest passion, my Athena, the Donkey Kong universe. So, yeah, I love this. I love this book. That's all I got to say. Do you have anything you would like to add?
I can't top that, but I guess I'll just say, like, I don't believe that, like, I don't believe myself when I say I love this book as much as I do, but it is a really, really excellent novel. I think, if not before playing Sea of Thieves, at least read this book before you do the Tall Tales. It will add so much weight to absolutely everything in the game itself.
Well, you know what? Now that they've added the maiden voyage, and you have to play the maiden voyage first, and you meet Ramsey right out of the gate, I would say like the novel would really boost that experience. Like you'll be like Lucille Bluth whenever she meets Jean Parmesan when you see Ramsey, because your arms will be flailing about, and you're like, Ramsey, he's talking to me. So that's why I would say read the book first, like before you even play it, if you've never played it. That's a good
point. I didn't even really touch on this, but I kind of went over the same thing with the Gold Hoarder. The same is also true of Ramsey. Just, we started off with the Pirate Lord as this very mysterious figure hyped up that we didn't know much about, because you can't even, before they added the Maiden Voyage, you couldn't even see him unless you were either a pirate legend or knew somebody who was.
Right.
And this book went a long way toward humanizing the Pirate Lord. And now he's just, we don't really call him the Pirate Lord that much anymore. I think he's generally Ramsey, except in like specific circumstances where we want to like highlight the reverence he's given.
Yeah, in our character gallery, in the Sea of Thieves section of the image gallery, but mostly characters, I've labeled Rathbone as the Gold Hoarder, and I've labeled the Pirate Lord as Ramsey Singh.
Oh,
because to me that makes the most sense.
That's profound.
I guess that's profound. And now, I've talked about, like, I went on and on about like tie-in media and, if it's canon or not, but I'll have you know, Cameron and everyone listening, and Chris Allcock, if you're listening, that I now have my pristine copy of Athena's Fortune, because I bought 2 copies, one to read and one to just display on my shelf, like I'm the Gold Hoarder with his treasures. But I've got my pristine copy of Athena's Fortune displayed with the rest of my DKU games, and is actually on the same shelf as such illustrious entries as Mario Party 6, Donkey Konga 2, and my burned CD copy of Donkey Kong Country Barrel Maze. So there you go, Chris. You're among legends yourself.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.